Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Hash Church episode 61. Are we really here 61 weeks later? We are, absolutely. Let me send out the invitations real quick here. I've got 3 different sites that I have to go to, bam, boom, bam, and that should do it. Then I'll just quickly wait for the YouTube chat to catch up from the delay. There it is, and I'll mute that. So there we go. Well, wow, what an incredible last couple of weeks. Well, 3 weeks, really. That was 3 weeks in beautiful, sunny Jamaica. Welcome, Etienne. How are you this morning, my friend?
Good morning, sir. Welcome back to Sound.
Yes, very nice to be back. Very nice to have been there. Very nice to have just been hanging out with all my Jamaican friends and other people from around the world. There were some from Germany and some from Amsterdam and some from Australia and many from America and Canada, and it was just it was awesome, man. It was seriously awesome.
Nice Ohio shirt.
Yeah, you know, I got to give shout outs to Alex. Alex is a really good friend of mine, the guy who started Ohio. We used to call him Buddha. That's how he went on the cannabis.net chat. And I've always really connected with Alex where we end up. In Amsterdam, we've always had a blast. We, you know, staying at the Hotel Krasnopolski and making the funny Russian accents while we stay there always was a blast. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Alex and to his family that we're thinking of him. Unfortunately, his father had a heart attack while we were at the Cannabis Cup, and he ended up on life support. And Alex actually had to let his father go. And I know that he was absolutely crushed and devastated by the loss of his father. I just wanted to know that I was thinking of him today, and I don't know watching, buddy, but my thoughts go out to you and your family. I know that was really a sad experience, and I lost my father in a very similar fashion of just a shocking moment in time, and he was gone. So let's have a puff for Alex and his pops, you know, here on Hash Church number 61, and let them know that we support them. And if you guys want to go support Ohio, you can Google that up, and they've got all sorts of cool products, wooden sunglasses and really cool pins and shirts and sweatpants and stuff. And it's cool counterculture shit. And yeah, let them know that you're supporting them, you know. So this one's for you, Alex.
Hey, Alex, deepest condolences. And welcome, D. Will you start us off?
Yes, bong rip in memory for sure. Sorry,
right on, D. Good to see you, buddy.
Loss, man. Good to see you, brother.
All right, so we're starting it off with a bit of a somber note today, but you know, we got to recognize these things from happening. It's not about lowering or raising the vibe. It's about acknowledging them and supporting our friends when they're going through tough times like that. So this one's for Ohio, this one's for Alex, this one's for your pops, bro.
We always got to take care of our own and recognize our own for sure, in sickness and health, and unfortunately in the most dire times. So much respect.
Boom. I also have my free DeLisi pin on because, of course, I like to think of all my friends' pops out there. And, of course, Mr. DeLisi still serving many decades in prison. Let's get this guy out. Let's let him be a part of the release. Let's write whoever we got to write. Hit freedelisi.org. I believe it's freedelisi.org, but you can Google it just to make sure. And you can sign these the petition to have Rick's father, you know, let out of prison after 27 years. It's been about 27 years too long so far. Let's make it happen. So, in chat room today, we were talking a little bit about someone asking me, hey, you know, I've got spinal cord something, and I need CBD. I need CBD. I want you guys to seriously be careful when you're asking for things like that, because what happens is it almost sounds as though, and we might get to that point very well, that when you say I need CBD, you'll actually be able to get what you need, which is your CBD. But the profile in the plant is full of a lot more things than CBD and THC, as well as the terpenes that are modulating these effects. So I just have a bit of a worry that the way mainstream is bringing cannabis into the mainstream is trying to leave out THC. I've seen it time and time again with people. It's always been right there in the hemp field. So a lot of people have thought, geez, why don't we just extract the CBD? We can do it without the THC. I always feel when we're getting directed by prohibition that we're potentially taking the wrong path. Now, not saying that extracting pure cannabinoids from hemp is the wrong path. I just think potentially a dangerous path is us giving more credit to one cannabinoid than acknowledging the entire profile, which I would almost stake my life a lot to do with the effects of that medicine. I think we should just acknowledge all of the cannabinoids and all of the terpenes, as many of these things as possible.
I agree, but unfortunately we've already seen knee-jerk reaction here in the United States with different states going with straight CBD bills. So I think your worry is late in being founded because it's already transgressing across the United States, because these legislators have been told that CBD is what it is. It's not THC. It's not the hut. And so they've sold these politicians and selling these states on unsound science, on unfound science at that, and it's literally affecting people's lives, across the board. And we saw, unfortunately, that kind of domino effect with one state passing these type of CBD laws and it going into others. And this is where we have issues, is because, as we stated, you and I can have the same condition, and CBD may work for me, but what ratio of CBD are you getting along with THC that works for you? What works for you may not work for me with the same condition, same cannabinoids, same CBD, etc., etc. So it's also a bit of snake oil salesman, that's being perpetuated, unfortunately. Correct?
Well, that's what I feel a little bit, and even just now in the chat, John said, oh, CBD works great for me as long as it's in a 5-to-1. I'm like, so the only thing you're considering is the ratio of CBD to THC, and that tells you that those effects are from that? What about all of the other things present in the plant? I'd love to hear about this from you, Mark Scialdone. How can we ignore other compounds that are obviously having an effect? How can we just say, oh, I need a 5-to-1. I tested it, I used it, that's what I need. How do we know that there's not a particular terpene or another ratio of cannabinoids in there that if it's changed, that same 5-to-1 stops working? And welcome, Todd McCormick.
Good morning. Well, if Mark's image starts talking magically, I will be quiet. But you know what? When people say this, don't you think that all they're measuring is the effect of the THC? It's not the 5, it's the 1 that they're feeling. And they suddenly think, okay, I got a little effect from that I can measure, so I'm going to say that the CBD did something for me, when in reality, if you take pure CBD, you don't really feel an effect. If you feel an effect from CD, it should be relief from, if you will, your neck pain or your whatever condition you're dealing with, if it's actually remedying it. But if you're not feeling relief of pain or anxiety going down or your appetite coming up or your sleep being able to settle in and rest through your sick night, then CBD is not having as much of an effect. Without the THC, you put THC in there, suddenly you're like, oh, I feel the THC, it's working. Well, yeah, right.
Well,
and that's where I feel like people are misinterpreting things on a large level.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Even the effects of the cannabinoid on seizures. Now, the cannabinoid's effects on seizures could once again be exactly what you're saying. If pure CBD is doing the job, then fine, we'll give it to CBD. But if it's not, and you require a profile, well, then that could be more accurately described as, a CBD filter on your THC or on your cannabinoid profile, because it's definitely, every time I've ever inhaled, pure CBD or any of the CBD high CBD strains, I have found it to be like exactly what Rob and Skunkman Sam call it, which is the anti-THC. It almost just feels like the opposite of getting baked.
It's not so much the opposite. The way you explain it is it blocks your THC from basically uptaking. So if anything, you're just getting, the CBD is just getting in the way of the THC being completely what it could be, but that's fine. I mean, a lot of people that use high THC, report having anxiety or feeling paranoid. The CBD would quell that completely, quell that.
And here it is. Taste Bud 420 just said this in the chat. A lot of people are scared of getting too high.
Yeah.
So CBD seems appealing, but they are potentially missing out on so much. And I think that that's a very accurate statement. It goes right back to the propaganda. I wonder if cannabis made people paranoid before billions of dollars and millions of people incarcerated happened of that propaganda.
Yeah, not to be rude, Mark, I think that that prohibition accentuates paranoia, especially if there's a cop behind you. But, when you're having a feeling a little out of body or you're suddenly experiencing something a little different, it makes you feel uneasy. And if you lose your sense of, I don't even like feeling drunk. When I drink and I start to feel like I'm drunk, I feel like, oh, shit, what'd I do?
I'm the same way. But I say uneasy and paranoid are very different. It seems as though they took that uneasy and they cultivated it with their prohibition fear, and it turned into this just incredible. I've seen people have the worst paranoia.
Is it that, or is it they finally put a word to a feeling? Because they didn't acknowledge feelings as much as symptoms. Overall, if you were feeling uneasy, have a shot, have a drink, etc., etc. Or feeling a little bit nervous, have a nerve tonic. Remember, they sold nerve tonics and things like that. So paranoia existed definitely before cannabis. And I agree that prohibition exacerbated it through its misinformation. Remember, they told us we were going to lie, kill, murder. Then they told us we're going to grow big breasts and we're going to go crazy and we're going to be lazy. And, all those things still haven't come true. But at the same time, the pervasive fear has gone so much into the common air that, quite a few patients come in and are initially frightened by how high they're afraid to get, because maybe one time they got high or they saw a friend get too high, so they're concerned now these ratios and these new numbers. What do those ratios and numbers mean? And am I going to get so high that I'm going to go crazy? And so that is a real effect and a real fear of patients, especially older patients. They want to get rid of their pain and effect, but they don't want to get some crazy high. So,
well, here's a story. Here's a story for you, Etienne. A friend of mine, an old partner in the hemp industry that I used to work with back in Manitoba, his mother-in-law recently contracted a form of breast cancer, and so him and his wife obviously being the daughter of this woman, called me up and very nervous and very upset, obviously, and so. I had some of Horatio's distillate, and I sent it to them so she could have that. And I just told them to, microdose up until they could get her to, potentially a gram a day. And then I guess accidentally what they did was they thought that the 3-gram syringe was a gram, and so they squeezed a third of it out. But these are 3-gram syringes. So she ate a gram of Horatio's decarboxylated active distillate, the LHO distillate, and aside from being like almost comatose for I'd say 18 hours in the sense of not being able to move her hands and arms and just like literally laying there, she wasn't scared at all, and it was really quite an interesting thing. She got a therapeutic dose of phytocannabinoids, and although
it's a heroic dose.
It's a heroic dose, but it's also therapeutic, and I would not be surprised that when she goes in the next few days for her biopsy to see if the lump is growing or shrinking, that in the least it's probably stopped. They're continuing to give her some, but on Tony's advice, a much lower, maybe 200 milligrams throughout the day if she can take that without the effects.
A true story, LV Musica that gets marijuana from the federal government way back when she first started using illegal marijuana. She was
in the 80s?
going to a coma surgery to try to relieve the pressure. Yeah. And she'd smoked weed, and when she went down there, they test their pressure, and if their pressure isn't above a certain threshold, they won't do the surgery. And because she smoked the weed, her pressure had dropped down. When she got there, they didn't want to do the surgery because she wasn't over the limit that she had to be at for them to basically do the surgery. And she was blown away, and that's when she really realized there's got to be something to this weed.
Absolutely. It's we've said it time and time again, but it's definitely miraculous to say the least, at least in how it works with our body. It is a true companion plant. Go figure that they've tried to keep us from it for so long. Go figure that there's, 500 to 600 people every Sunday that wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, or if they're in Europe, at 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and come and check this information out with us. It's pretty fucking awesome.
How many people out there have eaten too much? Even on this panel, everybody's probably eaten too much, taken too big a dose, and got too high. Correct? I know I have, but I did way too much. I figured it out, and it took me 2 days of fucking recovering to figure that out. I was a pig.
Yeah, it happens, man. The 11-hydroxy metabolite is definitely more powerful than THC. That metabolite is strong. I'll never forget watching 3 people go out on stretchers.
3 to 5 times more psychoactive.
Yeah, and I would say when you're feeling it, it definitely feels more like 25 to 100 times more psychoactive. At least that's what...
I did a batch of bud into butter before I knew about coconut oils or any of that stuff. It was just a chunk of butter with a ½ pound of weed. Simmered it in a frying pan for a while and did all that stuff, and then boiled it in water, then cheeseclothed it off, and then I, instead of taking just a tablespoon and putting it in with a mixture of cookie mix and being a proper mix there and eating those cookies, I buttered 4 pieces of toast with the butter. Then I made a batch of cookies with straight THC butter, no butter at all, just the THC butter, and ate a few of those. Me and my buddies were high for 2-3 days. We were puking green and shitting green for 2-3 days. We were fucked for 2-3 days, literally. It was bad. Never again did I do that. It took me probably almost 10 years before I ate anything again when it come to doing that. I was fucking paranoid of that for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, that's definitely a therapeutic dose right there, I bet you unwittingly you didn't even realize that you healed all sorts of random shit that was going wrong in your body that day.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I felt pretty bad for 3 days, man. It was a heavy situation. It didn't feel good for a while.
Welcome, Horatio. Just to catch you up, we're talking about a friend of mine that consumed 1 gram of your distillate orally the other day, and got well medicated. She's fighting an aggressive breast cancer, so obviously they are of the mindset of maybe take a little bit more than a little bit less, and she's facing a potential surgery in the near future. So it's I thought that it wasn't a bad thing. I wouldn't take it every single day, but I would build up to that. Wouldn't you agree? Taking a small amounts and just building up to,
Where did she start at? So she just jumped in at 1 gram?
She started at like 900 milligrams.
Okay, no, because I obviously live in that kind of world. So what was the effects on her? Did she trip balls, or did she take it like,
She just didn't really move much and laid down, and she, was really like got pasty mouth, and had really no fear about it though. Just wrote it out. Just sort of was like slept like a log.
It sounds like. So there were no negative side effects? There was no hours of puking or CBN blackout? Because when people say 1,000 milligrams, it's a soup. It's a complete soup. And I noticed that many of the people are describing side effects as the main event. And I'm like, THC regulates your system, and when it's not doing that, it's giving off euphoria. People are getting stuff with a high CBN content that's knocking them to the ground. And it seems like because I'm very allergic to something in cannabis, and when it's made into that sauce, I barf. And a lot of people barf on way, way less. So if she took 900 milligrams like a champ, it's pretty much her body taking probably 850 of that to the cancer and the 50 milligram dose to her head.
That's what I told her daughter. I said, because her daughter was very worried. She was like, oh, did I give my mom too? Like, is it going to damage her liver? Is it, she was just like unknowingly. And because she felt bad, she gave her mom so much, she took a little herself just to feel the effects. And the little bit she took made her so high that she couldn't believe that her mom was on like 5 or 6 times the amount. So in the end,
it doesn't damage the liver, it protects it. It's an antioxidant that protects the liver from oxidative damage. So it does just the opposite, like a vitamin, like vitamin C.
Thank you, Mark. And we also told her that if she's feeling these anxious effects of the eating too much cannabis, that bringing a little bit of sugar into your bloodstream can be a great help. Drinking a little bit of a juice or something, just getting your blood sugar levels up a little higher. And yeah, in the end, my thoughts are going out to their whole family. I'm excited. They feel like they have hope for the first time in this, because it's hard to have hope when you're looking at surgeries and chemos and radiations and stuff. I know there's hope in there, but it's just such a small glimmer compared to the idea of using a plant that you consume orally that worst case scenario makes you feel euphoria or knocks you out for 12 hours so you sleep wicked good. That is just night and day to me. That's like those are two very far sides of the coin, very opposite sides of the coin. I think it's time to get terpy. I got all these terps, and I think it's time to get terpy.
Okay, Mark, a couple of things. What was the best bud you had there, and what was the one experience you'll remember from your trip?
Okay, good questions, very good questions. I'm going to have to give the best bud, and now keep in mind, we didn't make water hash with everyone's material. We pressed rosin. I brought an actual D-nail press, had it on my table, and was literally pressing rosin. And I'll tell you, the first 4 people to bring bud over not drop the rosin came out of it. So at that point, Tony and I looked at each other. This could be very bad. This could be not good. And so we still pushed through. A friend of ours came up and he brought a nugget and he said, here, try this one. And we closed it and we squeezed it and we opened it, and it had dabs. There were dabs. They were kind of an orangey reddish color dab, quite nice. The soil and the heat of the sun really produces a reddish resin. And I'm not 100% sure that that's a CBN being that red, as much as a particular type of tropical terpene, either fraction or profile, that is found in strains around the world that are close to the equator. Once we started squishing buds, it was game over. We squished hundreds of buds. We got beautiful flower rosin. I couldn't even believe how beautiful it was. Like, it was as nice as anything. And it was the sun-grown Jamaican resin. And keep in mind, and a lot of people don't know this about the tropics, it's very important what time of year you are in the tropics, based on the quality of the food, the fruit, the plants that you will get. So we came for the Cannabis Cup during a drought. Now, it rained a lot when we were there because the drought was ending, but all the cannabis that was grown under drought. And so the resin heads are much smaller in a drought, which shows in our bubble video because we got most of our heads in the 45 micron. The heads just don't get big enough when the water is not present and pumping into the plant. They end up getting quite small. So all of the herb that we squished, all of the herb that was judged during a drought. And if you know anything about tropical ganja, this is pretty much the worst time that you could judge that cannabis, that is during the drought. So, and it's not like they just have water during the drought. It's an island. They don't just like go over to their next door neighbor and like take a leg off their river or whatever. There's literally like no fucking water till it falls out of the sky.
There's no pumping it from North California?
No, you can't pump it from North California. There's no tankers that are going to bring it to you. But so the best would have been very hard to say, but I'm going to give it to Omar. Omar was great. He was the guy hanging out with the East London I always forget their name. Terrible. East London Cannabis Club, ELCC, I believe. Greg was in here talking about it a couple weeks ago. we met a bunch of those guys. They were great guys. They hung out at our booth a ton. We definitely hung with them a lot. And Omar was kind of their guy. Omar was their grower that they attached themselves to, and Omar had great bud. You'll see him on some of the videos once I post them. So I'll give it up to Omar for the best bud this time around. And what was my best memory for sure, which is so random because I don't, take that much out of, for whatever reason, I just have always felt like if I get all prideful, it'll corrupt my ego and I won't be a nice person. Not to say that I'm a particularly nice person now. I couldn't say whether I am or not. Some people would say yes and other people would say fuck no. But when I walked up on stage for winning best product at the High Times Cannabis Cup, and Tony and I literally dabbed every single one of the people in the audience out with terps and flower rosin from Jamaica. He brought like 20 vials of terps, and it was just unbelievable. Getting up on the stage with Tony and having everyone like cheering, and every single person seemed to be our friends. It was like I recognized every single person in the audience. That was definitely one of my favorite moments of the entire trip. So thanks for the question.
How many people do you estimate came to the event from outside? How big was this world competition?
Well, the world competition all happened in LA, so I would really not know in that, how big it was in that sense. I'd have to say there were some thousand, maybe 2,000 people there, maybe more. I don't know. It's hard to tell. They used to always tell me there was like 5,000 at the Cannabis Cup, and I'd be like, what? 5,000 people? Maybe 3. I mean,
for those who never saw it before, Mark, what did they think of the rosin technique? Did they think they didn't believe it until they saw it with their own eyes?
Are you kidding me, bro? It was absolutely blowing their minds, for sure. Absolutely, like everyone wanted the press. They were just like, wait a minute. And then the coolest thing is here's the thing. Welcome to believe it or not, a flat iron, which may not be a one, you would not believe how many Jamaican women have flat irons. That is a common household item. So to be able to tell my Jamaican friends, look, dude, you can just go home and squeeze with the flat iron and make this stuff. The hash was not as inspiring to squeeze. We squeezed some nice bubble, but the Jamaican gum, it just came out too dark, and it just didn't look like a great product. It might have been. It could have been the most amazing topical. It might have been the most amazing for a sublingual or transdermal. I have no idea. It just from a smoker's perspective, I know that Tony and I first got excited when we squished, like, I can't remember which dude it was. It wasn't Omar first. It was another dude who actually squeezed out like reddish, orangey, goldish oil from the bud, and that was, we were like, woohoo!
What was Knife's take on the science of rosin? Did he try to explain it or anything, or did he have any input on how it might be happening?
Man, I'll tell you, Knife is a very intelligent guy. It was a real pleasure to sit down and talk with him. Mostly because of his unique perspective, and sometimes you'll have cultural differences that create a gap too far to potentially bridge between particular informations, and information is lost in the transfer of those cultural differences. And when Knife stepped up from this Rasta man perspective, I mean, he sat down, he had a gourd in his hand that had all of his fruits and his water and his chalice bowl, and I was just like, this dude is seriously legit. Now, as for rosin, he didn't discuss it too much. He really was coming from the perspective of trying to help us understand the Rasta culture, the Jamaican people, and the economic integrity that needs to be maintained for cannabis to succeed in that Caribbean area, in Jamaica and the surrounding islands. He inspired me, man. I just shut the hell up for about an hour and a half and listened to that guy talk. And I want to thank you guys as well for allowing Knife the time to talk. And I definitely want to welcome Mr. Dana Larson to the room. What's going on, Dana?
Hey, this is first Task Church. I'm not even sure if I'm doing this all right, but presumably you can hear me.
You are doing it 100% right, dude. So good to see you. I saw you in the chat, and I was like, well, Dana will come into Hash Church and talk with us about some awesome things. You're a man full of cannabis information.
I am indeed. I got lots of good stuff going on. Didn't want to hijack your Jamaica and stuff, though.
Oh, no, dude. This is how it goes. Hash Church leads itself. There's no agenda. It's put the ego aside, and when someone comes in to share good information, which I know you will share with us, I give you the floor.
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that. I got some stuff going on. I got a couple of books coming out in the next few weeks. People are interested in. If you're interested in the history of cannabis.
Yeah, look at that.
What's that? Oh, there you go. Right on. Someone's holding one up there. Green Buds and Hats. That's my favorite one, and that's the easiest to read. I got another one coming out called The History of Cannabis in Canada, and it goes from 1606 in times. It's fully illustrated in black and white, and it covers a whole bunch of history that I'm sure people do not know because I didn't know it until I had researched it myself. But there's all kinds of stuff about Canadian doctors in the 16s or the 1700s getting super high on marijuana extracts with them and their patients. There's a lot of cool stuff about how this was banned in Canada and the propaganda campaigns. And, you know, as a Canadian, most of what we hear about the history of marijuana is from the U.S., and we get a lot of the U.S. information on Mark in there, and I profile a lot of the other Canadian activists and what they're up to. They're within a big bud. We've all seen them doing that before. And it'll be quite a good book that I think will have a big influence, I hope, on the future of Canada as we see where we came from and get a better idea of where we're going.
Who did your illustrations?
There's a guy named Patrick Dowers. He also goes by Art Penn. He lives in Seattle, and he's done a lot of other. He's probably the most marijuana illustrator historian in the world. He did another book or other comic, illustrated version of the American film from World War II promoting cannabis, hemp farmers. And he's done a bunch of other cool stuff as well. But he's really good at portraits, at drawing things from history. All of the art based on real people and real events. He draws a lot from photographs and images and puts his imagination, blends it all together. I've been working on this thing. Some of the art in here is like 20 years old, and some of it was drawn a few weeks ago. And it's something I've been working on for decades on and off, and I'm really excited to come out in print. And I think whether or not you're a Canadian, if you're in Hash Church, you'll be interested in this kind of stuff, and it should be a really good read for people.
Yeah, it looks
when does it come out, Dana?
Go ahead.
We get them back from the printers on December 1st. I'll be shipping December 2nd to a lot of different stores and individuals, and order them on net. But if you go to this History Day, you should be able to do printers there if you want to be, or yeah, one copy. You get a lot. It's a wonderful Christmas gift for the stoners.
For this.
And I'm also, that comes out December 2nd, reprinting my Harry Potter book for like the 4th time now, and that'll 18, something like that, just before Christmas. So awesome. I'm excited to get these books out.
And what about what's going on with Harry Pothead?
Well, that's coming out December 18th. That's just the first one. I'm reprinting it again. I'm working on the sequel, but I've been on the sequel for, I don't know, 8 years now, so I don't really want to say it's coming out soon. Done next year, Harry Pothead and the 420 Code. But if you haven't read Harry Pothead...
I got a dumb question, though, Dana. J.K. Rowling has, like, pockets full of money. I mean, obviously she was richer than the Queen of England for a minute until she gave all her money away. I mean, can you literally, like, how can you parody your stuff that much? Don't you fear that they come after you at all?
I have no fear of that at all. I was actually more worried about the Green Buds, because that one, the artist used the original character and it's all original. He redrew them. But, you know, I've been on TV with that book. Nothing's happened in several months. I don't think I'm going to get sued. And Harry, there's no lawsuit possible there. Although when I wrote this in 2007, and every publisher I talked to was like, it's great, but we're scared and we probably won't, but they're just so big and we're so small. If she sued me, it would just be huge publicity. I would sell a ton more copies, right? I have, and there's no reason to. And J.K. Rowling isn't really super lawsuit heavy. She hasn't gone after other parodies, and now it's been like, the book's been out for 8 years in 3 different editions in Canada, the US, and England, so there's no lawsuits happening now. And I've actually got a guy who's got the movie and might make a movie out of it at some point. I'm not sure that's going to happen or not, but a Harry Pothead movie would fill my heart with joy, that's for sure. But no, there'll be no lawsuits in any of this stuff, and if it does, it'll just help me sell more copies.
So how about an updated version, your perspective of what's going on in Canada right now, what needs to happen, and where we're potentially headed, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, we're getting into the end game now of legalization, and it seems like it's going to be happening in Canada very soon. Missing it, and seems very clear on that. But I think the question for us now is, what kind of legalization are we going to get, and is it going to be a corporate restricted model with increased punishments for regular folks, or is it going to be everybody can access and participate in? And I guess we'll see. It's going to be up to the provinces, I think, in Canada. I think the federal government probably put in rules to end prohibition to the provinces to make out the details under our system. That's how it works in Canada with alcohol and tobacco. And I expect provinces will do different things. The Premier of Manitoba just recently came out and said that since marijuana is highly addictive, he sold at the liquor stores like alcohol is. I'm not necessarily against it being a liquor store, but it's certainly not my optimal choice. Packaging a very substance in with a relatively harmful substance probably isn't the best way to go. But I mean, if they're going to treat it like beer, your own, where you can buy it in a pub or a specialized place and drink it, where there's cold beer and wine stores, if that model goes for cannabis with malts and the ability to grow and brew your own, we have a lot of microbrewing, quite whole hog here in BC. If we could have the same thing with breweries for cannabis, I wouldn't be objecting to that model.
Here's a question.
I mean, where to sell cannabis, I wouldn't say next to the Scotch whiskey store is the best spot.
One question in regards to that. Do you think places like the liquor marts and the like Shoppers Drug Mart or these other lobbying for the ability to products?
You cut out a second there, and I didn't quite get exactly what you were asking.
I'll say it again. I just wonder if companies like the Liquor Board and Shoppers Drug Mart and these other pharmacies are lobbying for the rights to sell these products.
I think the liquor stores are, because they have a lot of unionized employees and they work with the government, and so they see themselves as to grow their employee base and get a new job, make them bigger and stronger and more. I'm not sure about Shoppers Drug, things like that. I really don't see those kind of stores ever carrying buds.
No.
I see Shoppers Drug Mart and stores like that carrying extracts and capsules and tinctures. They're going to sell raw herbs because it'll stink up their store, because it's not what they're into and it doesn't fit with them, right? Yeah. So I think it'll wait until you can buy extracts in a store, and then we would see shoppers selling capsules and cream and all that kind of stuff.
Hey guys, we already have cannabis in a can out here. It's kind of getting common. They use nitrogen packing. It lasts a long time. It's dark. You're going to see buds being sold at fucking Costco. And, the thing I think is that, the details are not going to matter so much, because you're going to, as soon as you let us have this back, us as a community, everyone's going to start arguing equal rights in commerce. Everyone. Everybody that's a level-minded business person is going to step in and say, hey, fuck you. All things are equal now. So you're going to see this move all over the place fast as shit. And one of the reasons why I was frustrated with people in Ohio is, dude, the details are going to fall off the face of the cliff. Once you give the plant back to the people, this whole game is on change. The profits are going to drop, the price point's going to go down, and everybody and their brother is going to argue equal space in this market. So, I mean, they couldn't keep it prohibited during Prohibition. I don't know how the fuck they're going to keep it prohibited or controlled during legalization, and they know it. This shit grows like a weed, and they're fucked.
I agree with that very much. That they couldn't control it under Prohibition. They won't be able to control it under legalization. People will be less likely to be afraid because the penalties and the risk will be less. We're going to grow more pot, and they're going to put a bunch of rules in that they can't really enforce.
Let me put it this way. What will there be to control when there's no profit in it? Nobody gives a shit about tomatoes in your backyard because tomatoes are what? A couple bucks a pound at best? you know, for great organic tomatoes over here. The reality is when it's worthless, no one's going to give a shit. And that's where it's going to get. The only place cannabis will be worth anything is if you've got semis full of it and you're an industrial grower. You know, it's gonna drop to nothing. And when it drops to nothing, the interest in like putting their finger down or stealing our cars or coming after our anything is gonna go away. It's done.
But I do think a lot of the legalization models they're trying to put in are based on, well, we're going to sell weed for $10 a gram instead of the underground guy selling it, and we're going to make all. But it's not going to work like that. Legal pot can't. It's got to be cheaper. But if it's still as expensive as it is now, then it's not legal. It's got to be way cheaper and way more accessible. And as soon as you're allowed to grow your own, as soon as legalization comes in, I see prices going down. But it's got to happen everywhere. If you're the only jurisdiction with legal weed and everyone around you is illegal, the drop until everyone gets there.
Can I point something out? Right now, at $1,600 a pound, which is not uncommon for outdoor, really quality outdoor in California, that's already under $4 a gram wholesale, and that's illegal, you know. So 454 grams in a pound, right? That comes out to $352 a gram at $1,600 a pound, so it's already becoming worth less and less and less and less and less.
And $1,600 a pound, I don't really see this year. It's down to $1,000 to $1,200 tops.
$1,200 a pound?
Well, then how come people keep telling me the Americans are buying all our BC?
I would smoke. I just want to ask.
$264 a gram, guys. $264 at $1,200 a pound.
Not for anything I would smoke.
What's that, Tony?
I would not smoke the $1,200 a pound. The herb that I'm seeing that's clean green, organic, sun-grown, outdoor, grown perfectly, they're getting more like 18 to 2,200.
They're trying to, Tony, is the better way to put it. But when they show up at the club and it goes under a microscope and they see bird shit or caterpillar poop,
that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the thing. The stuff that I'm sourcing doesn't have that. So
yeah.
it's,
I think they're trying. Look, a lot of growers are trying to get high prices. It doesn't mean they're getting them, though, man. And you know, and the other thing is export quality. If they're exporting it, game's totally different. But here in California, places like BPG.
Yeah, everything is tested before it ever hits the floor, so I know what's in it, and I know it's good, and I know it doesn't have anything on it. So you don't have to smoke it, Tony. The other patients will.
What about a situation like Colorado?
I'm just saying, like, as far as like the quality that I've seen in California, I've seen fucking 50 growers across the state. Everybody's got different stuff. They've got outdoor, they've got LD, they've got greenhouse. I'm just telling you the stuff that I've seen. I have seen the opposite. I've seen the stuff that I've seen in that sector of high quality sun-grown is in the range of 18 up to 24. They are getting it because it is testing higher than a lot of indoor. It's extremely good. I have some of it right now.
What part of it tests higher than indoor?
Every bit.
That's a general blanket bullshit statement. I got to call you on it. Why would it? All genetics being equal, what part of it's testing higher than indoor?
Terpenes and more cannabinoids, besides THC.
And you think so? Now, what you're stating is that if you grow pot in a greenhouse, you're going to get more terpenes and more cannabinoids than you would if you grow it indoor under lights.
I know for a fact, because I've done it myself, that you will get a wider cannabinoid spectrum, a higher terpene profile if you use the sun versus the lights. For a fact.
You know, I think it's a very general statement, and I think different strains would do different things in different environments.
Well, I'm going to stop you, because I've grown in Colorado, before I came out here, I grew 300 varieties, 20 different CBD, 280 THC strains in 4 cycles for 3 years in a greenhouse. I watched the different sun cycles. I watched the indoor. I did 300 lights indoor, the same exact strains in soil, indoor, and watched the different test results. You might see 10% more THC from your indoor than you would your outdoor, or a little more, depends on how you're growing your indoor. But if you're going side by side T-brews and doing organic, and you use the sun versus the light, you will see more, such as THCV, always seeing 0.7 to 1.2% THCV every time when it hits the sun. You could grow that same strain indoors and see 0.01, 0.02, very low percentages of other cannabinoids. The terpene profile I know for a fact because I extract terpenes, and I just extracted 3 unbelievably perfectly grown, sun-grown, assisted, not just outdoor, but it's greenhouse and LD. But the yields on the terpenes are 30–40% more.
We can agree to disagree then,
Well,
Tone. I mean, not to be weird.
Todd,
I mean, indoor environments have been bringing plants to amazing places for a long time. And I mean, genetics, all things being equal, if the genetics were equal, yeah, I don't know.
But the sun and lights are not equal. Indoor lights are a fraction of a spectrum of this sun. The indoor lights, Brad Higgins has come on and broken this all down, that those lights that we use are an absolute fraction of the light that the sun produces. So that, to me, something must be in that. It's why I love some of my
I'm a huge fan of the sun. I'm a huge fan of the sun. Don't get me wrong. I love the sunshine. If this was a dark planet, I would cry. So, but no, all I'm saying is, you know, I've seen plants really express themselves fully and sometimes at their best indoors in controlled situations when they're handled perfectly. And you know, I like greenhouse. I like augmented light in greenhouses. If it was a perfect world, that's where I would be too. In a $1 million augmented light greenhouse, using the sun and then using light when the clouds were making my day cloudy. I just don't know that, in my opinion, if the plant can express itself. Like, I've always thought of it like this: if a plant can do 100%, we always fuck it up a little, if this makes sense. The environment, the handling of it, something will get in its way of hitting 100% of its capabilities. So we get close. And if what you're saying is by putting it in the sunshine, you're thinking it gets even closer than it does under light, it's interesting. I would love to see more studies done. I would love to see control tests side by side with the exact same genetics, you know, and then it gets into a conversation about light technology, because as that changes, then, you know, potentially, you know, if it shows to be right, I still even don't know if it will be right, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll agree on you. We'll agree on a few things. The indoor, obviously, you have complete control over your environment. You're able to make sure there's no bugs and no molds and no pesticides. You have a clean, uniform product. Very high testing if you can control all your elements, and you can replicate it over and over if you do it really well. There is the sun variable, the natural variable. So what I meant to say earlier, in those 4 cycles, as an example, in the summertime, you would see high numbers of full cannabinoid spectrums, high amounts of terpenes. You would see like when I say high numbers of CBD, I'm talking 20% CBD strains plus. But when you hit the winter time, okay, and the sun cycle changes a little bit, you've got the different intensity, then you would see things drop drastically, like in half. So you'll get buds going from huge, you know, 6, 8, 10 footers, and then you'll get them, you just won't have the intensity of the sun. So you're not going to get like 4 cycles unbelievable, even with a greenhouse in, say, Colorado, unless you have supplemental light, which is then...
Look, we all know you're not going to get the consistency because the whole planet spinning thing, you know, right. But this is another reason why I do think that, you know, I have a hard time, and I guess really where we disagreed is when people generalize about what cannabis will do. I feel like they're wrong, because realistically, cannabis is so different. It's like saying a Chihuahua can pick up a huge log that a Great Dane could pick up and run across a field. It's just not possible. So different varieties do different things under different circumstances. And, you know, I've seen a lot of amazing indoors, and, you know, of course, greenhouses are great, but yeah, all of the great greenhouses I've seen have augmented light as well. I mean, and, you know, it's because of the limitations of the sun. So I would like to see these tests done. And, you know, I don't discredit what you've seen at all, Tony, but I've seen a lot of shit too. And, you know, you know, a lot of indoor pot is really, really, really good. In some ways, I've seen it exceed what's happened because of the uncontrollable variables in nature that a grower has to face. So, you know, if a grower gets a good run, yeah, you know, but almost every time an indoor run is good, and unless the person running it doesn't know what they're doing.
Which is almost always the case.
I mean, one thing I wanted to bring up about, you know, in terms of using cannabis testing from the labs on nuggets as indicators of what the plant that you're growing produces in mass, right? So I think the percentages in terms of the relation to each other are a lot more important than what a THC percentage per gram of nugget is. The weight per gram of nugget is most important to consumers because it's a representation of how much active chemical they're purchasing for their dollar. But I mean, a perfect example is, let's say you take one strain that yields a pound a lighter or is lower yielder in nugget form, has very little leaf mass or density, and has a very, very large amount of surface area for resin to cover. You're going to end up with different results than a plant that has a smaller surface area and very, very high tissue density, so that it's a ratio of how much THC per weight rather than a ratio of THC versus CBD versus anything else. So I think it's important to note when you're comparing the difference between greenhouse or indoor or any of this, that just because it produces 20% on a single bud outside and it does 15% inside, let's say, doesn't necessarily mean that especially once you extract it, that it's really any different than what it was outside or inside. It potentially can be. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the results that you do see are more of a factor of resin per gram of material that goes in, which can be changed just by trimming it better. I mean, by removing useless mass can just increase your THC percentage. So, you know, all that stuff in terms of relation of percentage to weight of cannabis is somewhat of an arbitrary argument, I think.
Well, let's talk about head size.
About
but
what?
You know what, though? Hold on. In the percentage of oils, and I don't think THCV is a great indicator. Some varieties don't even have it present. You know, so in all factuality, different strains do different things in different places. You could have had different runs, Tony, in 3 years' time that was a little bit of variation. I mean, in all reality, that could have been the way you were growing your pot more than the way the pot was growing itself, if you will. And it's hard to say that every single run was an exact same run. I mean, you know what I'm saying. So, yeah, and then it's also on harvest time too. Some of those cannabinoids aren't going to be present unless you let them go longer. And I mean, so
the generalization of that I was making that you may or may not agree with is what started this, and that's what I'm saying is I noticed a decrease in overall THC versus indoor, but an increase in overall cannabinoid full spectrum and an increase in resin size for outside, which would then increase terpene extraction.
But an increase of what? Of THC by the weight of the bud? I mean, that's just a representation of resin per gram of weed. It's not a representation of the chemical structure or composition of that plant. Or of that resin, should I say, not the plant. When you get the 20% of the nugget, that's the representation of how that plant was grown and the THC percentage of the resin on that weight. I mean, a perfect example is if you just use phospholode and make the mass of your bud extremely heavy, that's going to lower your THC percentage very quickly because you have a small surface area where there can't be a lot of resin. And then you have a very, very dense, high-mass plant material behind that. You're just never going to end up with 35% THC on something like that because the mass is too high to have that much resin on it unless it's, you know, so bracted out that there's all this surface area. I mean, when you look at cannabis under a microscope, you can really only fit so much resin per square, millimeter or whatever. whatever you are. You can only get so much in there, and if that square millimeter, it weighs twice as much than the plant next to it, just because of the plant's characteristics, it's going to adulter the results of the bud, but not necessarily have a representation of the full cannabinoid and terpene spectrum of that plant.
Right, and in my experience, most pot that was tested, most people that got strains and went and grew them outside, the THC, cannabinoids, the percentage of THC, which is what they were looking for, was not higher than their indoor.
Well, and that's what I'm agreeing with you. So if we pull back a little bit and take Fletch and go into a visual. So let's look at an OG bud that's, say, 1 inch big, and you grew that same OG bud outside, and that bud in relative was 3 inches big. So you pulled a 6-pound plant outside, and you had a ½ pound plant inside, and the relative size of that bud, 3 inches versus 1 inch. So I agree with what you're both saying. I'm just saying that, like, when we're talking about the actual volume of that bud when it's increased, what I'm saying is, and I'm agreeing with what Todd is saying, is that I'm seeing that you're getting less THC per mass, is what you're saying, Fletch, outside than when you do inside. But outside, look at the head, the actual trichome head size of that OG, the 120 specifically. Look at the 120 outside versus the 120 inside. Because that bud, it's like looking at the redwood forest versus your tree versus a tree. It's bigger. You're gonna have bigger heads. You're gonna have bigger. Yes, you will, for sure.
Not to be weird, but you know, when I used to seed separate all my resin heads, Tony, because I had, you know, the W.S. Tyler seeds from 60 to 150 back in '97 sitting on a rototap at my house. And honestly, depending on, and I did flower outdoors the same strains I was flowering indoors, and the reality is that it depends on so many variables. Depends on the weather, the wind, the light intensity, so many things when you're outdoors. And when I would seed separate, the resin glands would be the size they were, if this made sense. It would just be at some different harvest, or some different times of harvest, I would have more of different sizes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I was saying too. So the wintertime cycle versus a spring or summertime would definitely affect the head sizes. But let's say you're using assisted LD greenhouses. So you're using the sun, you're controlling your environment. That's what I'm talking about. That
right. I mean, what could be the difference between when you were in Colorado at 5,000 feet elevation versus 1,000 feet of elevation on the coast? I mean, there's so many variables that could affect not only the strain that you're talking about, but also the growing environment that you're talking about. And then, you know, let's say theoretically that the heads are larger on outdoor, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting more terpenes or more THC or anything. It's still just a mass, right? How much resin off of what size mass plant, and what the percentage of, what are you trying to compare? What the yield of resin, terpene, and whatever it is for the mass of the plant, right, as tissue? Or are you trying to measure the composition of the resin once it's been removed from the plant? And those are two completely different things. 30% THC strains can taste like shit, you know, just because they're just THC and nothing else. And there's, like Todd's saying, there's so many variables that not only strain, environment, everything else, that it makes it hard to really make a generalization.
Well, my generalization is when I'm looking at a strain versus the same strain grown indoor versus outside, I see smaller heads, more of them in less surface area on an indoor bud. Then when they get bigger and they go outside under the sun, they have bigger spacing between those stalks and those heads, bigger heads, little less THC, a lot more terpenes, a lot more other cannabinoids that are in it.
How do you quantify resin to get bigger indoors? Why don't you just leave it on the plant longer? Late stage, they're all going to develop up to a point of rejuvenation. It's up to you where you want to stop the growth if you're growing indoors.
Well, Skunkman Sam in chat just said bigger heads are better always.
So should we all let the plants go late then? And that, if that's what he's saying, then now that we grow for resin, should we all be taking our plants to a later stage so that in the later stage of development, it's developing the terps?
I think it's a generalization to say that the heads get bigger only at the later stage.
Wait a minute, how is it a generalization? The shit's growing out, not in. It's not Mark and Mindy over here.
It doesn't,
an adult
Todd,
that grows down.
Hey, listen, it's very simple, Todd. If you listen for once, just try to listen and hear what I'm saying. I have photographed the cannabis plant throughout its life cycle, and trichomes do not grow little babies and then mature out at the end of their life. They grow and mature, grow and mature, grow and mature, grow and mature. So what I'm saying is, just because you wait till the end of a plant's life cycle does not mean that's the time that you could still find those big, beautiful heads much earlier on, is all I'm saying.
Right.
It's
a maturity window. There's a maturity window on everything, and it's a volume of that size head per whatever your volume is. But at the end of the day, you know, even here's the thing is, like, I've been making hash from lots of strains for a long time. Some of my 120 plus micron hash, even now that we've been rosining stuff, isn't like, I've rosin 25 and 45 micron strains or hash that the rosin is incredible tasting. I mean, there's a lot of terpenes and cannabinoids and stuff in small heads just as well as there is big heads, and that's why I really like rosin to a certain degree, just like BHO does as well, is that it actually strips the plant of all the cannabinoids, or not all, but the majority of them, versus when you make bubble, you just get small fractions, which with certain strains is great because the majority of the good tasting bomb resin heads are above 73 microns and below 160. But not every strain falls into that category, and I've had plenty of strains over the years from seed and from clone that you know, the 73 micron or the 120 micron really aren't as smelly or feel as potent. Now, granted, that's not any type of quantifiable result, but they feel like smoking some 45 micron OG bubble that's, you know, 70% melty even before the whole rosin thing would put my ass to sleep. So, and it tasted great. So,
you made a statement though that you didn't think that just because the heads were bigger, it had more terpenes, and I do have to disagree with that, in the sense that if you're dealing with the same genetics and you add volume to your head, you're going to have more terpenes in that head.
But what I'm saying is that every resin head size is different. The composition of those may be different at those sizes as well. And you can't automatically say that all the flavor in OG comes from the 73 micron heads or whatever the flavor it is that you're looking for. Like, sure, there may be a larger volume of terpenes in the larger head, but is it the terpene that you're looking for or the terpene that you're trying to extract or get concentrated? And that's all things that change. I'm not saying it is or isn't one way or the other. I'm saying it's going to change with every variable that you change.
Oh, for sure. So let me just ask this then. Do you and Todd disagree that going from indoor to sun-controlled, that you're actually not producing bigger volume of heads? Not surface area coverage, but just bigger heads in general from indoor to outdoor using the sun as well.
I don't have enough to make that comment. I haven't done outdoor myself. I've seen tons of outdoor, but I've never done nearly enough testing, right? And not in terms of like THC per gram of weed, but like, what is the composition of this extract indoor versus outdoor, and which one has higher quantities of the terpenes I'm looking for? Those things I do not know. I don't have an answer for, and I don't think any of us has really done enough research to really quantifiably make those statements definitively.
Skunkman Sam has, and he says bigger heads have more terpenes. If the variety has terpenes, we want all of them.
Right. I'm saying I've never done it, so he's
no, but he has. Yeah. So he's in the chat room talking with us, and he did this for 35 plus years and had a lab and had the greenhouse and did all the breeding and the growing. And I wish he was in here actually talking rather than just typing things into the chat room, because he has such a valid perspective in the sense that he's potentially forgotten more about cannabis than most of us collectively know. But aside from that, just that he's done such an incredible amount of work that his perspective, I find, is always valuable in these conversations.
I agree, and I think something else we need to keep in mind too is just because there's a high terpene concentration does not mean it's a good terpene concentration. I see people always touting, oh, I got a 10% terpene result or this. Yeah, and I smoked that shit and it smelled like crap, tasted like crap, and it was 10% crap terpenes. So,
Yep.
I mean, high terpenes doesn't mean anything. A small percentage of one very volatile and very enjoyable terpene, 1% of that may be considerably more tasty than 10% of a crap terpene.
So this should amuse you then. All legends and all banner awards were done with greenhouse, sun-grown resin. All of them. Every one of them. So it's not just a terpene thing. It's the amount of yield of those resins. So a banner grown under the sun in controlled greenhouse is going to yield 20%, 24%. Whereas something indoor...
Like, everybody that's seen fresh frozen yields on bubble hash is like one of the craziest things ever to me, because everybody equates like whatever your dry out percentage is. If you've grown weed a lot, you'll know that it changes every round. The mass of the weed changes every round. You can't say that, oh, that was a 800 gram light, or that was an 800 gram plant and it yielded 100 grams of bubble and now that makes it 20%. You got like, I literally weighed 5 different strains because I had some material someone wanted to run fresh frozen. I took 40 grams of wet material and then dried it out, and the difference was over 15%, you know, in terms of dry out weight. It was like one of the smaller things went from 40 grams down to 6 grams, and one of the bigger things went from 40 grams down to 12. I mean, you're talking huge differences in yield per gram there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm just saying when you know, like you look at the bags, when Bubbleman and I run somebody's bubble, you look at the bags, you pull them out, and you're like, okay, wow, your 90 did great, or your 120 banged out. But if you see stuff like 25 and you don't see any 73 or 90 or 120, these are ways to read people's resin. And so same thing with a plant. And so what I'm telling you is that you should get that experience with utilizing the sun in some capacity, because when you do that, you're going to see bigger heads in all categories. Whatever those strains are going to carry, they're going to carry through on terpenes. They might not have as many heads as you would see indoors, because there's a lot of smaller ones developing all the time with that type of intensity, but you'll get bigger ones. It's kind of like growing a certain variety of grape, and you look at grapes the way they're grown. There's some that are grown really small and a whole bunch of them on their bushels, and some of them are just bigger and spread out. So that's all I'm saying, is that's what I noticed with the outdoor. And all of the resin that I'm utilizing now, I don't really use fresh frozen for anything anymore, because what I notice is, even whether it's rosin, full melt, or whatever it is, that head itself has to cure out. The resin has to cure if you want stable end products. For live resin and BHO and things like that, sure. I mean, fresh frozen's awesome and great like that. I'm talking about
to break onto the stability thing. I mean, you know, we're seeing with the freeze-dried hash, I mean, it's not curing stability by any means. In fact, it's like, you know, if you do fresh frozen runs and then use the freeze dryer, it pulls all the water out. That's for sure. I mean, that's what it's designed to do, and the shit is like dry sift when it comes out. But we also have to keep in mind that if you take a fresh frozen plant and you remove it from the plant and it doesn't degrade or dry out, oxidize, or cure or anything at all, if you remove the water perfectly from that, shouldn't that resin be just like it was on the plant, right? It's going to be sticky and kind of wet and all that stuff. So like stability to me is almost like chasing a dragon of how do you dry your weed or this kind of weed in a certain way so that it doesn't degrade quickly. And I kind of liken it to fruits or meats or stuff like that. It's like, you got to keep that shit in the freezer or in the refrigerator or it spoils. And some things are more susceptible to spoilage than others.
Yeah, I agree. I
It's
do
hard
like
to
the
know.
freeze dry. I do like the freeze dry as well. I do something similar to that, but I created my own vac dry system with that recently. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's about getting the water out. But when their heads are really young and they're still, and you got to look at. So what I've seen is when you're looking at the terpenes inside that head while it's still on the stalk, in its fresh frozen state until it cures out. And if you look at sift and you look at the, somebody that's going to dry a plant out for 3 months and then sift it, those heads and that stability in multiple conditions of how hydrophobic or philic they're going to be, I notice that when somebody takes the time, or myself, and you actually cure those heads out naturally and allow that transition, it seems to be more stable to me. When you use fresh frozen, just like when you cut the plant, it has an exposure, water has to get out, and chlorophyll gets out, and that's why you cure your bud before you smoke it. Same thing kind of with the heads that I'm noticing on particular products, not every product, but certain products that I'm working with. I find it to be a little more stable when the heads are cured.
Yeah, absolutely, Will. I mean, that's what the curing process is there for, right? Is you're trying to make the product dry and possible to transport without refrigeration. Just like if you chop a plant down fresh, wet, you can't put it in a bag for more than an hour before it's going to degrade, really. And then, but if you hang it and dry it, it's we're drying it so that it has a low moisture content, so that organisms can't live on it and then degrade it.
I would add one other thing, that we're not only drying it, but as you were mentioning, there are terpenes that potentially are not the ones that we want, and I find often these are the most volatile, the most, the ones that are just ready to go, the ones you lose in the cure. And it's like certain terpenes, once they're lost, it releases a much smoother, more enjoyable terpene profile that was being masked by that more bright or loud terpene, but it's a more caustic and a more volatile, and it kind of causes more of a scratch on the throat. And I had this conversation with Rob Clark a couple years ago in Amsterdam, and as well as Skunkman Sam, and he believed it as well, that there were potentially terpenes that, at least in the sense for the inhalation, there could be uses for them in other ways, but that potentially breeds terpene profile, so those ones weren't even present.
I agree, and there are some strains that have terpene profiles that get completely lost in the drying process, and you never get them back. And those strains done fresh frozen are, even though they're a little bit more caustic, like you're saying, make you explode when you take a toke of it, those terpenes, those are some of the terpenes I chase personally. Those flavors, those ones that are hard to find, that degrade very quickly, dry out when you dry the plant. Well, if we can capture those and not cure that flavor out, but still remove the water, I'm a pretty happy guy, because the way the plant smells when it's growing is definitely something I like experiencing, Well,
you need to track down Indra somewhere in the U.S. because he's got that cryogenic method, and he claims to be one of the only people that is able to extract super terpenes, the terpenes that are literally lost in every extraction process. He maintains them with his, minus 51 or minus 81, whatever the temperatures are that he works at. And it's quite I mean, I haven't seen the resin myself, but I've seen him defat hemp seed into a 61% protein powder isolate and a golden oil. And no one else I know in the hemp industry can do that. The highest protein powder isolate I found is 50%. His was 11 to 12% higher, and all of their oil is green because they cold press, which is a misnomer. You're actually heating things up when you squeeze those plates between one another, and you end up with a green chlorophyll-rich oil instead of this really lovely golden oil that he makes. You can take green hemp seed oil and filter it through carbon and get that beautiful gold color, but that would also leave a footprint, and if you tested it in a lab, you would be aware that that process had occurred. So in his, it had not occurred as I tested it in 3 labs. One day, I look forward.
What's interesting, with the freeze dryer process, I haven't done personally a lot of fresh frozen with it. My good friend Kush for Breakfast has, and he's gotten it down. He got the machine he was reprogramming the machine for a week or two, and the freeze dryer goes to -40. So I mean, you harvest the plant, goes straight in, goes into your freezer, and then gets washed. The thing goes to -40, and then it has the quote-unquote heating process where it sublimates the water right through a vacuum and a very, very light heat to get it to sublimate, right? The heat doesn't ever actually reach your product. It's just helping the water sublimate, right? But what's interesting is that, so he's doing fresh frozen. It's literally coming out of the freeze dryer looking like dry sift, right? I mean, just, it hasn't been touched by anything, right? And that stuff, if you keep it frozen, stays like dry sift, feels dry, but as soon as you get something of temperature to it, it immediately sticks to you. I mean, it's so sticky and gummy because it literally has never been cured. It came off the plant, was removed of its water, and then came out of the machine. It's never been cured. Those terpenes have never been cured out or dried out of that material, and it's some of the best hash I've ever smoked, period. His OG and his cookies, fresh frozen, which are a couple strains in my experience that lose a lot of highly volatile terpenes in the drying process and are hard to get back or hard to experience once it's dry, OG and cookies in particular. And it's by far some of the best hash I've ever smoked. Kush for Breakfast, cookies, and all that fresh frozen, freeze-dried, no cure. Does it make me choke and blow up if I try and take a big hit like I would off of some cured material? Absolutely. It blows you up. But it tastes so good and it's so potent. I mean, it's hard to argue it when you experience it,
Well, speaking of tasty and potent, I want to welcome Breeder Steve to the room. Thanks for making it up, Steve.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me, for sure.
Hell yeah.
I lurked the one time you had Machulam on. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, we're always happy to have different people on and come share the vibes. Probably that was Lester, actually, that time. I think it was. We haven't had Rafi on yet, but it would be great to have him on. Still trying to get tons of people on, man. I've been trying to get you on for a good long time and tell us some old stories and tell us what's going on in Breeder Steve's world.
Well, not a lot new. Just puttering along in the shadows and expecting things to change here and get much more open soon. So definitely hoping they move the right direction as they do so.
Yeah, well, it definitely it feels like it's going to happen. We were talking to Dana Larson a little bit about that earlier on, just sort of his perspective on what he thinks is happening. It seems as though, I mean, all politicians seem to be liars, but I guess the one thing we have going for ours is that he sort of has this legacy, and his father and his, both his father and his brother have passed on. His brother died in an avalanche, and his father's passed away some years now. So the legacy of his name could be potentially more important than than just selling out the country, kind of seemingly the way Harper did. It seemed to be pretty much exactly what Harper was doing. So I hope that Trudeau respects his family name and feels that he's got to do something good for Canada.
His brother marijuana possession charges when he died in that.
That's right.
Yeah, he had been charged with possession, and certainly Trudeau was a snowboarder. I think he smoked a fair bit of weed himself.
I don't think it's a far jump, that's for sure. So people are saying, when are you going to breed some more seeds? When are you going to produce the LUI, the Blockhead, the Sweet Tooth, the Legends Ultimate Indica? Damn.
Once it's legal to do it and ship direct.
That's the perfect world right there. Not many people really think about that aspect of it. I guess that's a whole. I mean, anytime we've brought seeds into the country, into Canada, we had to do it with Health Canada licenses, even for low THC hemp seeds. So I guess it'll just be like any other business. Once they open the doors for all of this, obviously they're going to have to let companies sell clones and sell seeds.
well, if people are allowed to grow their own, which of course they must be, then they're gonna like sorting through seed catalogs just like with tomatoes or anything else, you know.
Well, I was surprised that they allowed the LPs to order seeds when really how could it be legal to bring seeds from another country into Canada without a special import license? And no one was given import licenses. LPs were given 90 days, 3 months, to register and produce as many strains as they wanted to grow, because at the end of that, they wouldn't be allowed to bring in new genetics. Is that how you know it, Dana?
Yes, I heard something to that effect too.
Right. And wasn't there one guy who was doing a clone bank that was going to like be able to potentially sell clones to all the LPs?
Yeah, I suspect there was.
Yeah, it's too bad that I never saw that come to fruition, because that seemed like the greatest idea that I'd heard so far. Everyone was just trying to go for an LP license, but then this dude was just like, I'm just going to get like 350 strains registered, and I'll be the clone bank. It sure would be, that'd be a nice position to be the clone bank.
Yeah, but there's going to be, you know, free enterprise is everything in it, so there's got to be competition, and as many people want to do it should be able to. They shouldn't make the licenses ridiculously hard, if at all, you know. When I was in Switzerland, there was no licenses. You just went and planted it the same as you plant a bunch of carrots. You know, there was nothing to apply for.
Let's talk a little bit about Switzerland, because that was like just some of the most incredible times. Like, what was that, 2000, 2001, that they just sort of decided that they were going to, I don't know, like, was it even announced? How did people know in Switzerland all of a sudden you could just plant acreages of fields and harvest it?
I don't know who first cottoned onto it. Obviously somebody thought about it and had a look at the books and said it's not prohibited per se, but there was a canton by canton kind of harassment policy, perhaps, that was
right.
Some would allow it in their cantons and some wouldn't. So the ones that were open had people really going to the wall and taking advantage of it, for sure.
Holy smokes, were they ever. Well, you know what? You did well there, but by no means did I feel that you were taking advantage of anything. You were doing research and development, producing seeds and growing, you know, a couple of tunnels of beautiful bud. I'll never forget you giving me the cardboard box in Lugano there and saying, yeah, go cut some matches. That was just like, it was like 2002, maybe. That's maybe 2000. Oh, sorry, I was cutting out. Anyway, I'll never forget that. Getting those buds cut out, you know, those sweet tooth and all those beautiful plants you had in those tunnels.
Yeah, I won't forget the look on your face. That was awesome.
Peter Steve, what was the first strain that you grew?
The first strain that I ever grew was from Jamaican seed that I'd collected.
What year?
That would have been, I was 18, so it was quite a long time ago. I tried to think about that. It would be
90, 91?
You know, end of the 80s, like 89 maybe.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, and that was, I culled out, like we planted about 2,000 Jamaican seeds I had in a secret container from nice Jamaican brickweed we used to get. And I had them all started at a friend's place in the country, and his mom would water all the little ones. And then I came out later when they were about knee-high and starting to show, and there was just tons of them in little four-inch pots in a section of her garden. And I said, I'm just going to take one. There was one that was very stocky female that was just ahead of everything else, and I was like, I'll just take that one. And I put it in a big hole of compost and a big mix of organic goodies, and near a creek near my house. Man, and it had the full-on rainbow of pistils, like with purple and pink and magenta and yellowy pistils. It had just incredible sativa flowers. Southern Ontario, where I was growing, is
was
probably
it in
the
the
best.
ground or in pots?
Yeah, right in the ground, right in the ground. It was great. and you hardly had to water back there, but a few times you'd have to go out and water, and it was near this creek that it hiked through, and it was just beautiful. I'd played around there since I was a little kid, knew it like the back of my hand, and every summer after that, next year I put Northern Lights in that same spot.
How tall did that first crop get, just out of curiosity?
Give us 6 feet. 6 feet.
Kind of loose spindlies?
Yeah, the buds were snug enough, but they were totally sativa. Like, when I saw a picture recently of somebody's shot from a field in Jamaica, and I was like, spitting image, like the really magenta tips and very distinctive flavor and aroma. That blew me away to pull that Jamaican off there the first year, but it was just because I took the best 1 out of 2,000 seeds, you know. I'm sure the rest of them didn't even finish, right? But I was able to just say, I'm only going to take one of those out, you know, and it was the most promising one. So I love starting from seed and finding champions right from the beginning, because you couldn't even order seeds back then. That was you had to save them from holidays or whatever you came across if you liked it.
So your basic growing career started as a selector. You were selected right from the start. No one gave you a bunch of clones. You like literally.
No, that's right.
That's awesome. So how long before you actually started, like, okay, now I'm going to breed. I want to produce my own seeds from that?
Well, each year, with the exception of the first one, because I didn't keep any pollen, but each year after that, I made sure I kept a male to tag a little bit of pollen on a bottom branch or two, like I'd bag a bottom branch or two, just to save seed, because you really couldn't get any easily then. So everybody you met that smoked this super kind bud, like that Northern Lights the next year, they all wanted to buy some, and I said, I can't sell it because it's irreplaceable, right? So the thing I will do is give you 20 seeds and a 1-page instruction on how to mix up some good organic soil and how to choose a location, and go and plant your own. And I just always made a few extra seed because I always wanted to encourage people to grow their own. And I knew as I was going through university, I'd always wanted to move to BC afterwards. And I knew BC was also a hot spot of genetics. There's so many people growing in the most favorable conditions in a way to grow. So it was a real crossroads of strains. So when I first got to Vancouver, I just started collecting everything I could get my hands on. Anybody that was selling clones, I would always just say, yeah, I'll take a couple, whatever you got, and just collect everything I could find and keep running them all side by side. And I had like all of BC in a room downstairs in my basement. It was fun. So you'd always be picking out ones you like for various reasons, and I just kept making the beans and really enjoying that, more so than I would just producing weight, you know.
Absolutely. No, that's definitely when I met you, was when you moved to BC. I think you moved in maybe 94, 95, and then I came around 96. I think you'd already been in BC for at least a couple of years by the time I moved here.
Yeah, I came out in 94.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'll never forget, definitely, some of those old school I mean, it's still to this day, some of them are in my garden, you know. The Sweet Skunk obviously is in the top 5 list for sure. That grapefruit from back in the day, the Sweet Skunk.
Yeah, the Sweet Skunk was in 94. That was one of the first ones I made there. I think that was my second run of seeds, was the Sweet Skunk.
Yeah, that's it's never lost its panache for me. I absolutely love that profile. It's got that.
That was selected from 500 of the F1 seeds, and there was 2 recessive sativas, and everything else was mostly indica. And of those 2, they were very similar, but I liked the one a bit more, and that was the only one I kept. And I just said, this is such a stunning sativa, and it's out of the blue. It's totally unexpected. It's a recessive plant. So I thought, yeah, this is just delicious. And I knew if I just gave the cuttings away to anybody I smoked it with, we would never lose the strain. So it's just why it sort of open sourced it that way, you know, just pass the cuttings around, because it is a cutting. You seed it, it's not going to be as stable, right? But as passing that cutting around is a beautiful thing to do, because the more you do that, the more you see it, you know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I gave it away to a good chunk of people that were, all MMAR patients, and they were always happy to receive the Sweet Skunk, along with the Astro Boy and the Congolese, and a few other, the East Coast Sour Diesel that I got from my buddy Ro. And,
I love that Congolese. The Congolese and the Burmas are delicious as well.
Oh, yeah.
They have the same high notes like that. I love it.
Yeah, they're exotics. I like that, the high notes, exactly. Man, they're so tasty. Hey, I wanted to welcome Marcel into the room as well. He's been all nice and quiet sitting there, dude. Welcome to Hash Church again, bro. Oh, the Sweet Skunk.
How's it going, guys?
With Astro Boy and Congolese and a few other.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm glad to make it out here.
You gotta turn the YouTube off.
Is there a technical problem? It's kind of.
Oh, yeah.
They have the same high notes.
Yeah, it's the YouTube. I like that. Man, so tasty. Do you have YouTube on, Marcel? Because I can hear Steve talking on delay, so somewhere on someone's computer, and it must be yours because everyone else was muted at the time. Still going. You got to turn off YouTube, the YouTube chat where Steve is talking, the chat room that you were in. Somewhere that's going, and you just have to mute that box, because we've done that on a number of occasions. Well, I definitely look forward to the near future days where Steve will be able to come back and produce some really high-end seeds for the world. One of the things I always appreciated about you, Steve, was that you definitely were ahead. You can smoke the strongest resin. You have the ability to bioassay resin, and potentially you might be the person that I know. We were talking about it earlier, eating a gram of resin or eating too much resin and getting too high. Steve seemed to always love that. Like, you seemingly couldn't overdose. I mean, you did. I think you and Wayne knocked yourself out for a good 18 hours that one time when you did the sift, that whole case of, here, let me unmute you there real quick. I got you on mute. Are you try talking now? No, you're still muted. You'll have to unmute yourself, I think.
All right. Is this?
There we go.
Yes,
That's
you're
better, Marcel.
Oh my goodness, this is so much better. I think I was listening to 2 streams at the same time.
Yep, that was awesome, dude. Hey, I was just gonna get Steve to answer a quick question that I asked him there.
Okay.
The time we flew to Amsterdam KLM, and I asked you to bring me I said, bring me like a quarter gram of bubble to munch before I go through the airport. And he must have brought me half a gram. He brought me half a gram of totally transparent melt. And I just said, what the hell? And I peeled it off and ate it with some champagne and oysters before we went through security. And then I was tripping balls on that flight. I remember this, you were looking at me and said, you're great. And there was a second I was like, not enjoying it, and then I said, what are you worried about? You love to be stoned, you know? But they came by with the water, and I was looking at her like she was the princess here to save us, and I was just like, wow. I couldn't say water because my mouth was so dry. That was a bit much.
And plus, your face had literally melted off your head, and it was like down on your chest. Like, you literally had the craziest look.
I totally remember that. And then we go over to the Cup. We were flying to the Cup, and then on the way back at the end of the week, we say, I said, the highest I was all week was on the flight over.
Oh my God, that's how you start a trip with Breeder Steve, right there.
Oh,
he's
man.
on the plane next to me, and I'm literally thinking, I hope he doesn't like just stop breathing, because he's.
Oh, you know, you started talking about people that had heart attacks and they have to land in Iceland and stuff, and I'm just like, just don't say anything. Right? I was freaking out, but it didn't last long. I fucking passed out hard and just woke up stoned and skipple.
Stoned and Schiphol. I think many of the panelists here have woken up stoned in Schiphol Airport.
Who is sober here in Schiphol?
And I'll tell you, what a great airport to be stoned in, though. They got water massage, they got the movie theater, they got the rooftop garden, they got everything in that airport, man. If you've spent enough time in that airport, you've quickly realized that it's actually a pretty good airport to be stoned in.
There's worse.
As far as airports go. So what's going on, Marcel? What's new and different on the West Coast down below British Columbia?
Well, the token economy steps ever forward, and we made another token and had a potluck of productivity where people came out and brought equipment and cut and polished the Millefiori into the tokens. Nice. So this new edition was created under the same circumstances of people like gathering with a desire to see positive change.
Yep.
And so this is the token that we created.
New tokens. I'll show my old token. Boom, bam, boom.
Oh, look at that. Ready to go.
Yeah, dude, I got my token. So this is the new token.
Yes.
What is it going to say? A starship in every garage?
It says a starship in every garage, and it has 33 on the bottom.
Oh, nice.
And then the inside of the star is UV reactive, so you see the full triangle build. So it's 33 token units, which equates to $330 essentially, as far as what their exchange value is for the program.
And what is it? You guys mostly it's like people can buy heady glass pipes with that and do other things with that?
Yeah, so essentially anything that I create or that's created at the projects that we sponsor with the revenue from the tokens is available in the tokens. So it's kind of like a open source Chuck E. Cheese type situation. So as people exchange into the economy with tokens, it's a one-way path, essentially, where the tokens are then used as trade value. And the concept is that, you know, we can trust each other as a community and as individuals, you know, more than we can trust the people that are giving us the dollars. So when we convert the value from these tokens into the dollars, we're essentially like creating an investment inside of our group that we can all see the results from. Because when people like have benefit from the token economy, then we'll all know because we're exchanging the tokens around.
That's wicked.
So it's really just like any other complementary currency that people do, but instead of being like a geographical area, it's like throughout an industry. And you know, I'm hoping that my position within that industry is interconnected enough to entice the participation of a wider group of people. You know, because at its core, the objective is to decentralize currency. You know, so if Project 33 can create a cultural like meme or tradition that allows people to make an alternative to what the bankers are giving us, then that's something we can all like trust in more than we could trust in what they're serving us. So,
amen.
So essentially, what I'm doing is I'm working with Dan Collins, who's the documentarian that edited Degenerate Art. So he was Slinger's person that he worked with to create the film. And he's going to document it. And the way that I am essentially converting into the sacred economy. So I'm basically going to refinance into the sacred economy by creating tokens the same way the bank would create a loan for me. So they would just like magically create some like entries in their computer, and all this currency would like transfer around, and whoever I was getting the house, you know, so on and so forth. So when I refinance in, I'm going to take my equity out of the banking system and put it into these tokens.
What happens if you break a token?
Well, I would think that the program, basically what we're endowing ourselves to do is to create the tokens and maintain them. So if somebody had a broken token and sent it back in, then it would be, you know, either repaired or replaced, depending on what its collectible value would be. Because there's going to be like when the unique thing about the tokens, because they're an art object, is that they have a collectible value and then they have an exchange value. So, you know, because it's a millefiori, if it's a millefiori, it has its own value by the gram, depending on what people think of it. And then as an exchange item within this game, it has a certain value depending on what people think of it. So they basically have two values. And the culture that I want to produce is that we should produce these tokens in order to provide alternatives to financial products that the banks are giving us. So it's basically like somewhat like a culture of crowdfunding, but instead of just like crowdfunding and paying a bunch of money to the crowdfunding website, we're like holding all of the value inside of the community, and every $100,000 that is created into tokens then like bounces around the community, creating positive effects. So so if I refinance into the sacred economy and pay off my bank and all the rest, then I have an extra $2,500 or so every month that I can put towards helping other people to like achieve independence. You know, whether that's by growing food on my land and serving parties and showing people what's up, or maintaining the Starship coin project, and you know, continuing to help people to make these tokens. So if we start to look at this work going on to the token economy, and if I'm saying I'm going to refinance, say, $500,000, and from that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fund operations for a year and pay off my notes, and essentially just operate for a year with the end result of having the documentary complete, with the goal of creating another $1 million or so in token economy that's needed. So essentially, if I'm throwing stuff up and there's only $500,000 in the original bank, and we get people to collect and hold the tokens or do their own commerce with the tokens. So if other people start participating and sending the tokens around to do trades, they'll be working, but there will be a need for more because the prize wall of the Chuck E. Cheese is ever building and having different and desirable things. And then so at the end, the so as the tokens, when people are able, excuse me, you guys, anyhow, so if the tokens become in short supply and people are in need of more tokens, that's when the alternative financial products come in. So if there's a need for another $250,000 in products, and it can be linked to an artist who is in the process of purchasing a home, then that value can exchange to where the tokens going into the system become essentially a grant for the home property, but they still have the buying power, and then the artist is sponsored to do a major project onto the token economy, and then there's a bunch more stuff of a very unique caliber to put onto for people to exchange back. So it's basically using the agreement to use a token and backing it up with real estate into the community, targeted to people who are able to like continue the process forward.
Marcel, I've heard of this concept before in a lot of different independent community funding situations. One thing in your plan that I didn't hear that I've heard used is where you go to the bank and say, look, I'm going to give you $10,000, and what I want you to do, I'm going to tell you the exchange rate, and when people bring you this coin, you're going to take from that account and give it out so that you can get your currency on the market like the coupon system. We have a store called Canadian Tire, and everything they give you back is in their money. And slowly but surely, the economy of only your coins, it can get converted by the bank if you're using your money in that account, so the bank doesn't have any risk. Like, you could use your actual cash in an account to give your coin a value, and then when people use it in an economy and need to turn it back into cash, you're the one that defines the exchange rate at the bank because it's coming out of your account. Would that help get it started and simplify it if it worked in the system?
No, I mean, to me it's like much more of an idea of an opting out of the system towards something that's resource-based or, you know, ideally abundance-based, because essentially what we're asking for is like a shift in viewpoint of really feeling like it's important for everyone to have abundance, and that's what the project is about. It's not about helping people get by, it's about helping people to succeed by participating in each other's lives with our own abundance. So it's like a lot of you know, we're looking for the little bit of extra that people have, not people to like, I'm trying to dive all in to show that it's possible, but what really makes it work is just a lot of people doing a little bit of trade. So I'm not sure if that totally answered your question, Horatio. Do you want me to elaborate in a particular way?
Well, no, I totally get it. It's kind of basically to get people to use your money, you would tell the bank the exchange rate. So it's the same value system, but it would be somewhere everyone could see it. When I think about financial systems, because they used to do a wooden coin that was like pressed, and the key was that people knew that they would always have a value at a bank. Now, it was a one-off bank, but it allowed people to turn it back into money if they decided to opt out of the system. Basically, it allows it to work with everybody without basically giving up on it and being, if they get broke.
Well, these are designed to be operating within the system that we all operate within. So, like, as a group of all of us, we know that these represent the possibility to buy future work that is produced within the framework that these are producing. So you can look at the state of my project or of this project and assess what you think the future value of the token is based on how many of the tokens are out there and what people are doing or saying with them. But then there's also the actual value as a piece of artwork in dollars. So you have multiple ways to get out of the token economy. It's very much an opt-in or opt-out type of situation. However, the opt-out, because of the nature of the program, involves opening the circle rather than closing it back in, because it's a decentralized. So if when you want to get out, there's basically somebody else looking to get in, and that's the easiest avenue for the same thing to work. So it's a lot like buying high-end glass and speculating that the value is going to go up, but you can actually like still be in position to swoop the glass as it's getting made, because you have the tokens, but the tokens themselves are, you know, 1 of 100 or so, and each one is going to be affiliated with a different artist. So you have a lot of different like designs and beauty within each token set. So people that are like, you know what, I like this project and I want to collect one of every single token that comes out. If I had 100 people that did that, then it would probably mean that the whole project was funded, for, the first year, easily. So, it's really like, the beauty of this system is that it doesn't take a whole lot of participation in terms of how many people are actually available to participate. So, if we have a small group of us can show very big results, in my opinion, because of the close-in documentation that we're going to do. And because the bar is essentially so low as far as what projects have done in the past, as far as like showing what abundance-based lifestyle is capable of.
Interesting. Definitely interesting things. I know the whole barter and the trade thing. I mean, I know Steve dabbles in that. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this, Steve.
Oh,
What do you think?
Well, there's a lot of ways to approach these community currencies, local currencies. I absolutely love alternative currency of all, whether, it's something as old school as bullion or Bitcoin. I have everything in between. I do a lot of business in trade credits that are typically business to business. So every business has the right to print its own money as far as gift certificates or corporate script go, right? So you can monetize these in a circle of business, and it really it's the most incredible loyalty program of all time, really. It keeps people within their circle, and the circles have rails where they meet, and you can trade across the world. So I can get a hotel room anywhere in Australia with trade credits I've earned in Canada, because there's interchanges and clearinghouses for these. The U.S. Department of Commerce says 1/3 of global trade is cashless, like doesn't involve legal tender. We trade more in lawful tender than legal tender, because involuntary slavery was made illegal, but voluntary slavery was never made illegal. And the involuntary slavery is the legal tender laws. But we have a remedy, and that's while we're forced to accept their monopoly money, we have the right to accept other forms of payment as well. So once we do commerce ourselves and really practice agorism, they can suck the wind out of their sails just by not using their currency. And I'm a strong believer in that.
Absolutely, and what I'm hoping to show with this program is that we can actually implement a culture where people are encouraged to partake of the abundance by creating a personal type of currency in this like refinancing type of deal. And so what we need to do is create a culture so people can like participate in these projects and help them to succeed and be the watchdogs to make sure that they succeed because of the investment that everyone's making, but to like actually like get to that decentralized currency down to the cellular level where we're back to the regular IOU system, which is realistic.
Yeah, exactly. Send me an email, man. Send me an email and I'll share some other work with you.
I was gonna say it would be cool if you could, I like the idea of you guys two connecting about this, and potentially, I know Steve, you have a lot of information that could potentially help Marcel.
I've built something like that for 8 years. It's different. It's not exactly the same, but you'll find it very practical. It's getting very widely used right now.
Heck yeah!
I've got an app. We've got an app for it, and it's very convenient.
Nice.
You can get the houses. You can get the houses on trade,
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool, man. Very cool that conversation erupted in Hash Church.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's,
somebody's going to say, throw the money changers out of the church soon.
Well, I think that when you drop that number, Steve, that a third of trade is done cashless, like that is unbelievable.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not just the chicken for the fish. It's fighter jets for palm oil. It's huge trades between countries, but there's tons of corporate ones. The biggest trade, I think, to date, sort of corporate to government, was Pepsi Cola wanted into Russia. The Russians wanted to sell Pepsi Cola, not Coca-Cola, and they couldn't pay in rubles because they're worth nothing at the time. And what they did was they paid 4 tankers of vodka, shipped to New York, keep the tankers, no deposit on the tankers, and that vodka's Stolichnaya. So they built that. It was a Pepsi trade for vodka, and it became Stolichnaya. And they trade vodka or Pepsi for their media, right? The media arbitrage is like a cornerstone of corporate barter. So it's fascinating, the world of opportunity there that most people aren't even aware of,
Wow.
The monopoly money, like, it restricts trade. The liquidity is not always there, and it's broke by design. It's issued with interest. The interest never circulates. Every invoice has interest, but none of that interest has ever entered circulation. It's mathematically impossible to repay. It creates debt slavery. That's the definition of usury. So you set up mutual credit systems with zero interest. You have an equal amount of accounts in surplus and deficit, so they should always cancel out. That's how you know you've got a balanced economy, and that's the ledger. And there's many third-party record keepers that keep this double-entry bookkeeping for just debits and credits and trades, and they can mirror any currency. So you could have virtual euros or virtual US dollar or virtual Bitcoin, virtual gold, whatever you want to price stuff in and think in. The exchanges will translate on the back or do the exchange rate, but it just mirrors the national currency while slightly mocking it.
I think it's a really cool idea and everything. I just wanted to ask you a question about it. So I like it better than type of Bitcoins because those are like virtually created by logarithms that are unlocking things and miners and stuff like that, where this is like a physical object that possesses value. Is this something that are these coins worth like 10, 20, 50,000? Are they being stored in a certain way?
No, we don't print them. They're just strictly digital.
No, I know that. I'm talking about Marcel's coins.
Oh yeah, with Marcel's, yeah, they're physical tokens. Yeah.
So my tokens are okay. My tokens are this. They're an art object. So I mean, they're just sitting here in cases in my house, essentially. But so far, there's been 100 tokens created of the original design, like Mark has, and 100 tokens in the 33 token. So that's a total of 133,000 in tokens that's been created. Of the 70 or so tokens in the series that Mark has, those have primarily been gifted to different people. Who they're essentially an invitation to participate in the project. So there's those, and then this. So I have probably about 30 of those left, and I have almost all of the 33 tokens here now. So that's about 100 of those. So that's the state of what's available for the token economy right now. Now, as far as the things that you could exchange from the token economy, I have probably like 6 or 7 pieces that I'm quoting people in token units. So I have it.
Marcel, I have for a second. The Chinese have ripped off absolutely every glass object anybody has put out, and not necessarily to a T, but can somebody also not knock off these coins?
Well, I mean, realistically, the amount of work and effort that goes into them is going to prohibit a lot of that. Like, if you're going to knock off a $300 token and it costs you $50 or $60 just to, like, try and make something to see if it'll pass, you know, I don't think that you're I think that you could have people having low value tokens in the sense that they created something that people don't recognize as having as much value as they say it has. I think that's kind of my intention with the system is to make people know what tokens are out there. The tokens are primarily one of 100 series, and I'm using a lot of volunteer labor and participation, so we can make lavish slabs of tokens.
Are they numbered?
I have, in Mark's series, I have a high-res photo of each one, and they have kind of a serial number. If it hasn't worn off the back of your gem case, Mark, you probably can read it. It's like...
I think having the serial number or a number inside the actual glass, something that's signature, and then having a vault, like something that has a certification, signature, vault, and then you got yourself the Marcel Bank.
I mean, that would be pretty awesome. It'd be a cool, like, interactive art piece. Honestly, like, I'm more interested in, having the next party and spreading more ideas about being aware of currency and aware of the issues that it creates in our personal lives.
I understand that and respect it. However, there are unscrupulous people out there, and if I read in the comments, if somebody tricks somebody in the community into accepting their fake Chinese glass token in, then you're already breaking that economy. So that's why I was asking if the coins were specifically numbered so that there's some sort of differentiation that it can actually attest to its reality as opposed to they blatant rip-off, and they will rip it off as if they know how to do it. The Chinese will. No offense to anybody.
I don't think that's really it's not really that possible in my opinion. There's the high-end Millefiori that do exist are worth a lot of money, especially in slab sizes like this, but because of the way they're created and how limited and how much skill is required, they're not easily copied. So art itself has always had a counterfeit market, but it only worries, it doesn't, people don't really trade in it because we're all smart enough to notice the counterfeits for the most part, especially in art, and I think the Millie would be the same way because they're small handmade objects still.
Yeah, so what he's kind of saying, Etienne, is that Millefiore's art pieces already exist that sell for big money, and China's not...
I understand. I worked in a glass shop. I totally understand that. However, knockoffs happen, and people are going to, if something is set, because, look, I was a printmaker and lithographer. We were all watched and had to be checked because of our ability to actually do the art and know how to actually do the printmaking. So with any economy or any other kind of economy, even when we do coupons, etc., they're dated, they're timed, they're stamped so that they can't just always just come back in, or people can't just copy and make their own. So my concern is I've had to deal with it in my own business. So I like and I understand and respect what you're trying to do. I'm just trying to make sure you've considered all those angles because, glass is one thing and economy understanding is another thing. But the rip-offs that people are out there, even people that have ripped off your ideas, etc. So, no offense. It's just
this cultural meme that we're trying to create, which is that if somebody wants to knock it off, all they have to do is play ball by the rules we all agree on, and they're off to the races, and the world's a better place for it. So, if I inspire someone that's not part of the program, because essentially what I'm going to do in January is I'm going to bring in 4 or 5 badass artists who I think can pull this program too, and I'm going to have them help me complete the work for me to refinance in, and in exchange I'm going to help them do their own month-long project here to make their token. And then so that's the objective when I was talking about creating $1 million in the token. If I had 4 people that I was working with and each of them created a token bank the same as mine, and so we make that here, but they're their tokens. They get the liability and the benefit from the tokens. So that's what that's essentially what this program is supporting, is for this facility here to exist in order to create these token banks and have the like marketing machine to direct that awareness so that people can be spawned to start doing this. So ideally, people in all industries would do this as a widespread way of creating a resource-backed economy by displacing the bankers from our life one product at a time. Like, everyone has to buy a financial product to like do it the way everyone does it and buy houses. You know, what we're doing here is we're going to say it's in everyone's interest to take a select group of people or a select person one at a time and just fill their vessel and then on to the next person. And as that happens, each of those people will be endowed to attempt to fill the vessels around them. So it's like this, a starship in every garage. Let's get the ships out and like empower them in a cellular type of way.
Awesome, dude. Dropping it. Dropping the nolly. I say that on that note, I'm ready to have a nice big bong rip.
Yeah, it sounded like Etienne wanted to be your counterfeit security.
There you go.
Director of the Marcel Bank. I mean, that's what I got out of it, that he has your back and he wants to be part of it.
I think that's...
He knows counterfeit.
I love the idea of having security features and different things into the different millies. So, for instance, on the winking millie, there's a UV outline on the eyeball of the heart. So you could, if you had a UV flashlight, you'd be able to check for that. And again, like especially with these, I also have a high-res photograph of each one of these. For each one of these original series tokens. I haven't photographed the second series yet. Not every coin. But I love the idea of supporting this through our community because we are already doing this so much with the you grew it, I blew it mentality and the sharing and passing of all the resource that we do. Like, to me, it's as much about just tracking what's already going on as it is creating something new. Yeah.
Much appreciated for sharing, dude. I'm sure it's given the people in chat a lot to think about. It's always on Hash Church that you'll hear different sort of things, you know? You never know what we're going to hear. I thought Steve was going to come in and talk about shishkaberry, and he talked about economics and barter. That was awesome.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark, and all of you guys. It's a pleasure every time I get to be here.
Keep doing that voodoo that you do, and keep that. Look, the idea and the concept's great. You know, I just want to make sure it's protected so that it's something that can continue to grow. You know, no pun intended or pun intended. You know, just out of safety concern. You know, because that's why, you know, Mothership, they etch their glasses, and even for demos are put in so that it is permanently marked a demo accordingly. So there's different ways that, you know, things can be marked accordingly, and so much respect that you guys have taken it, and I have respect that you're using the high-end millies, and, you know, so that starts from the initial idea to full execution. So, you know, I hope people can get on board and look at this, because other cities have. I looked into this back when we were dealing in hemp 20 years ago. You know, places like Ithaca, New York actually created their own dollar bills in the downtown area. And it really sparked the idea that to bring back small-town America, to bring back the local economy, to support the local economy. We didn't want your big dollars. We wanted to support this. So if you got this here, then you could get your dry cleaning done free on this day or at this time, etc. And it created an economy downtown that really reinvigorated Ithaca, and other cities saw that by creating their own economy and by people buying into that economy, but they had to deal with some counterfeits initially. But once they got that dealt with, they still, to my knowledge, to this day, still have a very flourishing local economy. So it has been proven it can be done. It's just you have to get the people to buy in, and by having that type of security, you have more people that want to buy in. So much respect, Marcel. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Etienne. Thank you. Awesome, guys. You guys ready to go?
What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say, this kind of ties into value, and Todd was talking about this earlier, saying about the price of cannabis, this and that, coming down. Now, once it gains, the one thing we were talking about earlier, what I think about is, in the recreational market, yes, prices drive down, and we do that. But when there becomes a value, a medical value, to a pharmaceutical company or another industry, that's when they start to. That's what's happening. I see it's pulling. We've got our grassroots, we've got our individuals, we've got growers growing, we've got our community, and then we've proven that there's medicinal value. And I think our battle is going to start soon. When you talk about the prices and how it's going to affect things, as soon as they grab onto it, fully grab onto it, and say, okay, we subscribe of cannabis in the mainstream, I think they're going to drive the prices the other direction at the same time. What is your thoughts on that, as far as the value of cannabis is concerned, as a scale of economics where we've got those two industries pulling? Todd?
Unmute.
You know, your microphone dropped, Tony, while you were speaking, and it blocked out while you were making that statement. If you wouldn't mind repeating it, to be quite honest.
Okay. Basically, I agree with the statement you were saying earlier. You know, once it's in the hands of the people and cannabis is in our community and things, it would drive the prices down. But once it actually has medicinal value, pharmaceutical value, where these pharmaceutical companies are going to subscribe to actually using it as medicine in their mainstream, what's your thoughts on them actually driving the price the other direction? So we'll have these two things going on at the same time.
Well, you know, a good friend, you know, of ours tried to, a long time ago, make generic Marinol, which would have been just THC, which is what a lot of us are producing now, you know. THCA is not generic Marinol, basically. And, you know, you're going to see a lot of people like yourself, really. You're a great example, too, you know, expressly separating cannabinoids and terpenes and making them available, you know, for however people want to apply them, really. I mean, everybody has a whole different take on how they use them. And I think it's going to be really hard for because of people like you and so many others, it's going to be really hard for the pharmaceutical companies to come in and say, hey, we're the only ones that can do this for you. You know, whereas look at Marinol is technically dronabinol, which is a synthetic version of THC. So they're coming in and they're building you their version of THC and going, here it is, you know, in sesame oil encapsulated in a gel cap, you know, here it is. And now you can come along and say, you know what, actually here it is, I got a kilo of it and it cost me pennies. So they're done in the way that I think they can control it like that. And as you know, and this is why I'm not afraid of the details going forward, because I think this is inevitably such a difficult crop for them to control. I mean, I started off my career growing in my grandma's closet. She didn't even catch me for a year. I mean, that's the reality of cannabis. I mean, and then when she saw that I grew weed, she tried it one spring, and I got paranoid and cut down her pot, you know, because it was around the house, you know. But, you know, the truth is that anyone can do this. I think when it's worth pennies, this whole conversation's upside down. The whole conversation, you know.
So you think? So that's good. So I want to say something about that too, because and I think that when marijuana is really means that farmers can grow it by the hectare or by the hectares, you're not going to get perfectly manicured buds out of that, but you can get large quantities of CBD and THC, all the flavonoids and terpenoids, and mix them all up however you produce it for very, very low cost. And I think there probably will be also the more expensive pharmaceutical products available. Possibly that will be what your healthcare plan will cover. So those options will, I think, for a lot of people, they're going to choose to get it from their friend or from somebody grow it themselves if it's going to be that expensive to get it, because we know that high potency cannabis extracts are not very hard to make, and if it was legal, it would be very, very cheap to produce. So I also see a downward trend in prices, but I also think that people who want to legalize profiteer off it, so they're going to want to put rules in place that try to maximize their profit, their competition. But those rules I don't think are really going to work. I mean, it's very hard to legalize it and say you can't grow your own and we're going to sell it to you for $20 a gram. That's still prohibition then, and that's not really going to work. So that's my vision, but I do think they're going to try to control it.
I honestly thought in Ohio that they could, if it passed and you give all the people the confidence of feeling like they don't get arrested, I feel like, not like it's cancer, but it's such a change in consciousness that everybody starts to do it. Everybody's got bulk material, everyone's trying to process it, everybody starts to play with it, and the whole conversation gets placed upside down. So, people were worried about corporate marijuana, and my thing was, God, you could grow your own shit 2 or 3 crops before the corporate weed was even on the shelf.
You got to think of it a lot like wine or tobacco business, because people can grow their own grapes and make their own wine. They can grow their own tobacco and roll their own cigars. But there's going to be big companies on one end of it, and then there'll be boutique everywhere in between, And when it's wide open legal and you can grow it in fields and harvest it with massive machinery and process it with massive machinery, clean organic rosin will be $1 a gram, less if
it's
they
like
wanted
any other agricultural crop.
That's right, yeah. So
a race to the bottom. It's not a race to a top. Yes, we're supporting a false economy, but even this false economy over the last 16 years that we've been doing it, we've steadily brought the price down. And it's
absolutely
go down. And then not only that, in the last couple of years, we aren't setting it. They're coming in setting the price. So it's fascinating, one, the economy itself and the false economy, but I agree that more people will be growing it, but at the same time, a lot of people are lazy and want other people to grow it for them. When I was in Amsterdam, what surprised me when I was in line watching people was how many people were buying pre-rolled joints. Dutch people buying pre-rolled joints. They didn't want to go through the hassle or anything else. They just wanted the end product.
That's right.
Yes, there will always be those and the ability to have the end product, but at the same time, the price is only going to come down. It's inevitable. It's not.
What do you think? What do you think?
The falsely inflated price. It's for a temporary time, but it's coming down.
What do you think the floor is going to be? I mean, as low as we could grow it and project it, even on large scale, we were always around $340 to $500 a pound. I'm talking large scale. That's less than $1 a gram to produce, say, greenhouse or sun-grown, really well-controlled.
Well, when I can have contracts and I can go out and actually scope the crop and actually see what's actually transpiring, which I can't even really do now. I can do it with a small handful, but it'll be like real business farmers that do it right now. Rouse has their person who goes and buys their apples. I go to your apple orchard and I say and look and taste and say, these are good apples. Okay, let's send it off to testing, make sure it all passes everything. Boom, it passes. Then we go to market, and that's what's going to happen. Right now we're dealing with this false situation, again, because of the prohibition where you're coming to me to buy it, but in the future it's going to change to be distributors where I'm buying from the distributor, and so the manufacturer has to go to the distributor, and then a distributor, and I deal directly with them. And so they're only going to be dealing with bids, and the bids are going to go down over time. It's like any other agricultural crop. I have no idea where that's going to go down. You're going to see technology. You're going to see maximization of seeds. You're going to see also maximization of manufacturing products for cannabis. So all that's also the prices of production is going to come down as well over time as technology is available and on that mass production scale. Look, if I can go into any drugstore and buy plant food, well, if I can then go into any drugstore and buy cannabis plant food, okay, then that's a whole other different type of economy and scale there that we're talking about. But still, people are not every patient can grow. Not everybody's going to want to grow. Some people are going to want to come and best you, Breeder Steve, and they're going to want to best every archive seed. They're going to want to best everybody, so they're going to take it up and take it seriously. But that's a lot of money. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of energy. People will try and still will be there, but at the same time, people will want product, and it's only, as you know, it's only going to come down.
I think more importantly, it's an olfactory thing. You know, not everyone has that olfactory that has that ability to like sense those flavors and those tastes and be able to take in that plant profile and bioassay it. All my favorite breeders that produce seeds were all really heavy smokers. They all liked extracts and would smoke in almost any ability that they could. And it seemed like a very important factor if you're if what you're doing is choosing strains for their phenotypes, you'd obviously want to know what those phenotypes, how they affect you, and that's a direct relationship that seems to be with all the best breeders.
You know, I think you're going to see it field grown, and the cannabinoids will be a byproduct of industrial hemp production. We'll be growing oil instead of digging up the oil sands. You know, they could be growing so much you can do with hemp, as we all know, but there's no need to have it restricted to low THC plants anymore. Once it's legal, then the bulk of cannabinoids will be harvested like corn oil. Like, there'll be just so bloody much of it, you only grow it for decoration in your yard, you know, just because you'd love to have some plants around. You know? Like,
I agree.
You can have opium poppies all over the end of your driveway and nobody says boo. So they don't tell you can't grow those for decoration and they have to be locked up or some kid could make poppy tea. It's illegal to make poppy tea, but still you can grow poppies all over your front yard. So cannabis has to be at least that way. What's that?
If a cop comes by and sees that you've scored all the poppies in your front lawn,
and then you're scored them, if you score them, you got a problem. But you harvest most of it post like drying. You don't have to score poppies to harvest 80% of the opium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that's it's just that it's such a double standard when they say you can't grow pot in your front yard or whatever. Because you can have poppies. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to have poppies. I'm saying it should be so easily accessible and inexpensive that it's not even exciting for the average person anymore. You know, kids aren't going to be interested in it if it's like oregano on the shelf. You know.
Well, and I agree with what you're saying because, like, if you look in California where everyone grows, 400-gallon, 200-gallon outside, you're growing more stock and more plant-based than you are buds. Even though there's a lot of buds there, think about all the stock, all the roots, especially the stock, though. So that stock has the same potential as hemp. I mean, it could be...
That's right, yeah.
You know?
It might as well be your high THC hemp fields, your high CBD hemp fields. You can have cannabinoid-rich hemp now, the way I see it. That's what I'm gearing up for. I'm more interested in farming it like corn, but still organic growing. Everything will be monoecious because you can't have the males falling down. They get into the way of the harvesting. They die off sooner. So it'll be cannabinoid-rich monoecious strains in fields, and the resin will be the byproduct. You'll still, like you would with wine, you might want to have a Nepali import or Lebanese import if you're like your hash flavors. It's still going to taste different than Idaho or Saskatchewan, you know, even with the same strains. It's just going to be beyond what we can imagine at some point. It has to be, because they can't step on our rights to enjoy it forever and to take massive benefit from it. Whenever the government imposes quotas, they're causing that artificial scarcity, and there's no benefit to that, you know? It's better, it's just wide open until it's where it can be, you know? There's nothing wrong with it growing in ditches and parks and people going out and rubbing it. You don't have to have it behind barbed wire and under lights. It's okay to have under lights. You like growing indoors, but I would way rather have outdoor.
So it sounds like 2016, you guys are basically saying overgrowing the nation is working, right?
Well, we'll hope so. I don't, you know.
Todd feels the advantage is already ours, and that's a good thing.
There's only one problem, is that the government doesn't want that to happen because they lose their tax revenue. If weed's $1 a gram, then how much money do they make now? I mean, up here in Oregon, they're going to charge 25%. In Washington, they charge 37%, right? What's California going to be? They don't want weed to go down, so there's really only 3 things they can do, and this is 3 things that we do with almost any agricultural commodity, and these are the only possible things you can do to artificially stimulate overproduction or to prevent agricultural collapse. That's government subsidies, so they give you money to not grow shit, right? You create like a artificial consumption, like we put 10% ethanol in all our fuel in the U.S. That's from corn, right? So that, stimulates the corn economy, right? The other one is to somehow and the last one is to either like what's happened in Colorado where they imposed pesticide regulations, and that is having impact right now. They'll get over that, but that's just right now government imposition or regulation legislation that imposes that. And like here in Washington, the one thing they're doing, and also in Oregon, is they're capping square footage. And that's the other thing, is if you cap the supply, then it'll artificially inflate the price and keep it where Prohibition left it. So they get all their tax money.
Well, there's only so much money out there for them to tax, so they're going to get it one way or the other. You're gonna, if you don't spend it all on weed, you're going to spend more on concerts or something
Well, I'd like to point one thing out too. Unlike tobacco, unlike whiskey, unlike wine, it's easy to grow cannabis in a closet and have a really good result. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was super happy with the pot I was growing myself, partly out of pride that I grew it myself, and partly out of the fact that I was getting it cured properly and drying it just how I liked it, and I was able to smell those terpenes and experience what it was like fresh. And when you buy a bag of weed, a lot of that's lost. So to grow it yourself, there's really a lot of beauty in it, a lot of elements that can't be bought in bags.
You've never even been high until you've grown your own. You've been stoned before, but you've never been high.
Steve, at Posse, we always taught the best pot you'll ever smoke is the pot you grow yourself.
Absolutely, 100%.
But there's always going to be a market for that $20 grow, but it's not going to be us, because we're all hardcores who smoke a ton of weed. None of us are paying retail for our pot now because we'd go bankrupt if we were paying $10, $12 a gram for every fucking gram we smoked, right? But most people only smoke a little bit, and if you're just having a gram a week, then $20, who cares? That's nothing to you. But so there'll be a market for that. But we, people like us, we're 90% of the consumption out there. The lightweight's taking a very little bit, and so there's got to be a lower price for us to be able to get it at either wholesale or own, or to get it in a different way. But just like wine, you can get a bottle of wine for $8. You can brew your own, or a fancy restaurant and pay $100 for a bottle of wine, and that bottle sells too. So I think there's always going to be people that are willing to pay a lot for some great bud in a nice place and as part of a cafe or after dinner or whatever.
Absolutely. But the boutique market will always be there.
Yeah, there'll be a range of prices in the end. People will be happy to pay a premium price.
Especially if you can add the entertainment factor, like you said, restaurants and at events and whatever else. That'll definitely bring the price way up, But
if you just need a few puffs and you're good for the night or for the weekend or whatever, then you don't care. So it's going to be a lot of different price points.
Well, and the one thing I was going to say in Colorado that I noticed, since you got to remember, they look at these as experiments. The reason why they're experiment is because they've been handed a new instrument. And that instrument's like a new keyboard, but it's different, and they got to push keys to find out different sounds. So like what Fletch was saying is exactly what's happening, is that as they've developed this new experiment and they have different departments that are already in place, they're developing different ways and mechanisms to be able to manipulate and control things, even if they're not even aware of them. Sometimes they're accidentally manipulating the market because they're just not maybe completing their job. Such as transferring licenses. Should take 30 days. The state's taken 6 months. That's 400 people trying to transfer their licenses in business, trying to conduct, and patients and other people are getting completely fucked. And then at the same time, they come in with pesticide different things, which I think is 100% valid, and I think it's great. The health department and different things are getting involved. But what they're finding out in this experiment is exactly how they can kind of let the industry flourish, but also hold it back by pushing different keys on that instrument. And so Oregon, Washington, Colorado, each state is developing their different experiment, if you will. And this thing's going to evolve. And I think what I see is that, you know, the more we can push everyday folks to learning how to grow and learning how to extract their resin and learning how to identify what is good, clean medicine, however you're making it, that's the strength and what I think is going to eventually overturn in what Todd's saying. I think that there's still...
Just going off that, what's the cost now? What does it cost if you're a patient and you're right now or you want to start growing? What is the overhead cost? Because if you think about it, it's not cheap, the overhead cost to actually get your light, get your situation, then get the seeds, etc. I mean, it sounds great in concept, but it's not cheap. Not everyone can afford it. Not everybody has access to a 1,000-watt HPS or a place to put a 1,000-watt HPS, much less to store, you know, a metal halide for their, you know, for their vegging or, you know, maintain their own clones. So
right. Can I bring something up though, Etienne? Right now there are people that have multi-million-dollar food-grade greenhouses that are producing things like, you know, everything we eat in our supermarket. When it becomes legal for them to add cannabis as a crop to pre-existing business models, you're going to see basically the cannabis start trading at a price where it's probably double or not much over the cost of actual production. At that point, our gardens, the people that are growing at home, will have to compete with the reality that, dude, weed's $3 a pound at the supermarket now in a jar, or I could get your stuff for $300 an ounce, but that's a little fucked up. So our stuff is going to become inevitably worth a lot less because that's going to be the reality of the consumer. Dude, I go buy it down the street for nothing almost, and sorry, but it's going to flip like that. People that still want to grow their own are still going to grow their own. Grandma's going to have her own tomatoes and red peppers, and she's going to be proud as fuck about them. And people like, you know, me and Steve and others are still going to grow our weed because we like a particular strain done a particular way, and it's easy for us, and it's a hobby thing.
How many people choose to go out and buy beer? How many people choose to go out and buy beer as opposed to brewing their own? And that market's there. It's accessible. There's kits and everything available. Yet people still.
Not the same though. Cannabis is so much than beer.
That answer. That actually there is the answer though. In Colorado's experiment, 50% of the market is still caregivers, and 50% are in business, and they're still doing over $1 billion a year in taxes with 4.5 million people in the total state. So they're charging 23% taxes on the rec side, 7% on the medical. Average prices wholesale indoor range from $1,500 to $2,000. So there's floors, and greenhouses and say outdoor hemp, CBD hemp, you can get for $500 a pound. So there's definitely floors that I've seen, and I think there's going to be a limit to how low it will go, and the way that those agencies and the policies in each state that are implemented will affect those costs in the different sectors. So I don't know if it's going to be until like if you had your perfect world where Breeder Steve said, okay, we're gonna, and I've seen lots of hemp in Colorado. There's hundreds of thousands of pounds of CBD hemp, and they're very, very low end. As low as they're going to go is $500. So there's going to be a low end mark at some point. But the only time I think it's going to get ridiculously cheap and offset like that is when Breeder Steve said farmers start cultivating in a multi-platform base. So where you're saying, okay, I'm growing for the stock, I'm growing for these different byproducts, and the cannabinoids and the THC and the resin's a byproduct. Like that's just a blimp on the business model of the plant. That's when I think it's going to go. That's when I think it's going to start to do that. You know?
Yeah, when it shifts from horticulture to industrial agriculture, it's another story.
Right. When Colorado actually has competition from Wyoming, Montana, etc., then it's game over. I mean, it's because currently it's in a suspended false economy still, but when Wyoming's producing hemp and Nebraska's producing hemp again and competing in the prices and flowers as well. I mean, we're talking decades down the line here, people. We're not talking the next couple of years.
Not really, though.
That's what's going to happen.
But think of this. Imagine if Jack Daniels was only available in Tennessee. I mean, because this is where we're at right now, and as soon as the feds change, everyone is under the pressure of everybody else, because there's going to be Lynchburg, Tennessee cranking out great whiskey, and y'all all have to deal with it. And they're going to have a right to ship it to Berkeley or to Kalamazoo or to Mark's Place in Canada, because it's legal, mate. And then you have to deal with the price structures that got created by this international commerce, no? Imagine if you had to smuggle all your Jack Daniels, every bottle of Jack Daniels that wasn't in Tennessee was actually like bootlegged. It would be worth so much more money.
Yeah, the policy writers aren't going to allow. They're going to collect their tax money. So like what Fletch was saying, and I think it was Dana, he has a thing in here. 37% on $2 a gram isn't much. Even if you were charging $37% on a few bucks a gram, they're going to have. There's just cost of doing business and keeping it and doing this in the first decade. I think they're going to have policies in ways that make it so that it's just not going to be as low as humanly possible. I don't know. I seen what's happening in Colorado.
It'll be different in different areas.
Tony, you're right. They're going to collect their tax money one way, shape, or form. They're going to get their money.
That's right.
That tax is going to fluctuate with the situation of other agriculture economies. They do so with corn, they do so with wheat, and they will do so with cannabis in the future. It's inevitable.
I think something also is that they have interest in prolonging the amount of time that it takes for this to become industrialized as well. Because not only is there the money that they collect off of taxes, which is all good and great. It gives, like in the case of Washington, we fired our liquor control board because they did such a shitty job with liquor, right? And Costco wanted to sell liquor here. We voted to get them out, and then we gave them weed 6 months later. To manipulate that. I mean, I almost guarantee the liquor control board in Washington State lobbied to get weed controlled by them. Why are they even called liquor control board if they're a marijuana commission? I mean, it's completely pointless. So they have interest in prolonging it and making things like applications take 6 months, because what happens during that 6 months? People spend money. And what do they do in all those communities? They spend money on rent and living there and moving there and whatever else. So like if they processed everybody's shit really fast and made it really efficient and ran this thing correctly, it would wash everything out real quick. They have interest in prolonging it because there's all these communities that are benefiting from investment from all kinds of people that aren't necessarily going to make it back out.
That sounds good in theory. However, I'm in the NCIA, National Cannabis Industry Association, and there are investors around the world being held back just at the slightest breath, waiting for the opportunity to kick the door in. And once the opportunity to kick the door in, it's open. Pandora's box is over. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. So it's still a false economy, but they can only keep it for a certain amount of time. It's not going to stay that way for the next decade. You know that.
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. But they have interest in doing whatever they can legislatively to prolong that period, right?
Yeah, like I said, they're going to get.
That's not the case in Canada, because in Canada they've got the mandate, that they have to do it now because they want to show the best results over the longest period of time before the next election. So I think that at least for us here, they've said that their main goal with legal grass is that it's cheaper than black market grass, so that they can get their taxes. So there's a mandate to make it cheaper right now, up here at least, you know. And they also, if they only get it into full production 4 years from now, they're not going to have a lot of results to show as far as increased tax revenue. If they get it done in 6 months, then they've got 3.5 years to show some money, you know. So hopefully, I don't know how far they'll kick the door in, but we're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're trying to do in Washington too. Is they're they're trying to make it cheaper than like the producers have no tax. It's all just on the end consumer now. So they're trying to get the producers to produce cheap enough so that they can undercut black market, but they don't want to make it if black market's $8 a gram, they want to sell it for $7, you know. Or they want the market to be at 7 because that's how they perceive the most revenue for themselves, because it's generally short-sighted. They don't understand.
That's already more expensive than it is here, and they've already said they're going to make it cheaper than it is now. So we might be looking at different realities politically there.
Also, one other thing, it's like, you know, I mean, some people may disagree with this, but I think there's a consensus, at least the people that I talk to, you know, the war to the bottom is always not the best. And in Colorado, ever since the rec door opened, it wasn't a race to the top who can make the best. It's been a race to the bottom who can sell the cheapest. And the quality of the product and the care behind it, in my opinion, has fallen.
Sure it is.
You know, and so I think that's always something to keep in mind as well. I see a little bit more on the West Coast, more of like pride in the farming and the cultivating side of things, like you would see in Rastafari communities. You know, there's a lot of pride in the Northwest Coast in farming and keeping things. You know, they don't just farm cannabis; they farm other fruits and vegetables, and everything is a different culture completely than, say, the East Coast. You know, so I think each policy in each state is going to be unique and in their way, but it's all going to come down to what Fledge said. Whatever that market is, to maximize that revenue and that tax, they're going to be right there, right behind it.
Oh yeah,
you know?
There's lots of kind growers on the East Coast, without a doubt, for sure. But there's commercial people everywhere. But I know what you're saying about taking pride in making a sacred plant. You know, really appreciating what you're growing. But I think coming from that background and carrying that forward, there's no reason you can't do it kind with a tractor, you know?
Now there's a t-shirt right there, Steve.
I'm not trying to take anything away from the East Coast peeps. I'm from the East Coast, and I definitely, you know what I mean. It's been a war on the East Coast, especially if you're in Florida. Every year for the last decade has been worse and worse. You don't want to be caught dead growing cannabis indoor in Florida. And then they gave you the wonderful CBD bill. So hopefully it'll turn around. So, but I just, you know, as I've floated from the east all the way out to the west, I just noticed that, you know, it's just a different, totally different, you know.
I hear you, man. I know where the west is.
I think that's very interesting, Tony, because that's why we were kind of, you know, relieved that, you know, Colorado actually took over the first helm to see what was actually going to happen with the economy, what was going to happen with cannabis, because we were curious here back when 19 was going to happen, what was that possibility, where it was going to go. But it's interesting to see how, you know, Colorado started off, then see how Washington State dragged its feet, whereas Oregon's like, you got a dispensary? Come the fuck on in, it's legal. It's just been very interesting, and still waiting to see how Alaska happens, and we'll see what happens in the current. But it's been very interesting to see how, as you stated, you know, it became a race down to the lowest quality, and that's what really surprised me when I was in Colorado and going through the dispensaries. looking at the retail side and looking at the medical side, because as a patient, and seeing the difference in the quality, accessible and available. Certain strains are only available to, medical, to then not available in retail. So it's still interesting to see how it's still shaking out. It's again with, Washington State dragging its feet, and what will transpire here in California, because, will it become boutique styly like, Napa became with the wine? Will there just be, specialized boutique areas in Humboldt and Mendocino where people grow this special type of cannabis here, etc.? But it's inevitable that, the economy and agriculturally, it's just inevitable that there's just going to be a production versus quality. Always has been, but I don't see people going for, special quality tobaccos or anything like that. They've all gone for the common denominator and what it is as cheap as possible with taxation. So we see that with other agricultural crops. So why is it then no different, or to be expected no different with cannabis, even though we hold it in an entirely different light and respect it and love it? It's completely motivated our lives. We see with Colorado that not necessarily the commercial applications have the same ideals as what we've fought or been involved for.
There will certainly be a Bud Light market. That's for sure. I agree. I'm more interested in the Cohibas than the Marlboros, for sure. But there's going to sell a lot of Marlboros. I don't care if I'm the person to do it or not. I'm just sort of speculating, as most of you are. That's how it'll go eventually. They'll definitely, there's always been a commercial market and a heady market, right? You've got Napa and you've got Central Valley. The quality's different and the price is different, and there's a lot more Central Valley than there is Napa, right?
With what happened in Colorado with the pesticides, is that, when I read it, it sounds like, oh my God, everything's changing. And I read, I started to read through what they approve and what they disapprove, and I'm like, holy shit.
You cut out on us, Horatio. Please, if you can restate that. For some reason, you started off and then you cut out immediately.
Am I still cut out?
I had you now.
Okay, well, I was asking, with the pesticides and people getting these recalls, normally that fucks up people's production practices to the point of possibly crashing their business. So when someone, I see that in BC, everyone said, I solved my PM, and they just jumped to, I'm buying a new product to solve my PM. And with what's happening in Colorado, doesn't that make the price go up when people finally get an organic solution? It doesn't seem like the price will keep going down.
So remember when we talked about this on a hash church a long time ago, and people didn't want to hear it or talk about it. And we were talking, and this was also brought up when we were talking about cloning over and over and over. And what we're seeing is a classic case, in my opinion. You go from basement, and I was part of it, basement or closet, basement, warehouse, right? And when you go closet, basement, warehouse, when you're in your basement, you're at your home or you're in a closet, you're more conscious about your, what you individually, you're responsible for your individual environment, so if you were in somebody else's grow, you come home, take a shower, then you go into your grow. You're probably a lot more clean and responsible when you're an individual that's responsible for 6 lights or 3 lights or something like that. You can keep a super clean grow room and environment and tons of control. But then when you go into a warehouse and you say, okay, you're going from basement to warehouse, and people couldn't get financing and couldn't get banking. So you have to remember how Colorado started, and still doesn't have banking. So things were cash, and you couldn't borrow money from outside because those people that were here had to start from the ground up. And that's essentially what I had to do as a patient. And when you start that way, you're limited to your vision and your design. And you're like, man, I'd really love to build something like this. But the reality is we only have 40,000. We'd like 400,000. And so what I saw happening in a lot of the grows is people had a lot of makeshift in the beginning. And a lot of people were trying to build a certain style in a certain way in that warehouse, and they tried to scale up commercially. And they started creating production scale models without having mothers and having environmental controls and SOPs that you would see, say, in Canada and Vegas and newer markets that really built upon this experiment. And when you do that and you constantly clone and you're not keeping the greatest mothers, and I'm not saying everybody in Colorado does this, so don't get me wrong, but if you're not keeping good mothers, good environments, and the vegging and the flowering isn't consistent, and your staff isn't consistent, and the feeding isn't consistent, and you get out of the way and you get a little bit of PM, and you start growing that systemically, and you start cloning it, and then you're never going to get rid of it. And all of a sudden, it's like a little virus. You're like, oh, wow, we got a little PM breakout. That's how they think about it. No, we got a little PM breakout. We're going to put some safers or some bullshit on it. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, how many clones did we take? Well, we took, 100 or 200 or 500 or 3,000. And of that database, you've got now 10% contaminant PM. Next time it's 30. Next time it's 70. Now every single genetic and everything you have systemically has been cloned from this and passed along, and you've got a contamination and a breakout. Then they start turning to Eagle 20 and all kinds of other chemicals to try to control it. And those chemicals do work, and those things do actually bring it back. But if you had to cut down 80,000 or 8,000 plants and start over, that's not a good business model. So people would rather try to cheat, and then they would rather try to do what they can to get through it instead of starting over. But a lot of these places and a lot of things, even the place that I left, the new places that we start are completely different. It's like just drop a bomb on it and blowtorch it and start over, because it's not going to get any better. And then when your immunity's down, you got russet mites, different types of bugs and spider mites, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, we've got mites, we've got russets, we've got everything, And so it's a domino effect. And then the people that are getting into business that I'm talking about have never grown before. So they're running a business not with anyone that's like their partner that's a grower. These people like, we're just going to get into the cannabis business and start growing. And then you're just growing poison, and you're just growing for the bugs, and you're just growing for something completely different. So that's my overall opinion on it. Whether it's right or wrong, that's just how I see it.
I mean, one thing that falls right into that is, why were these agrochemicals developed in the first place? Because when you industrialize agricultural crops and you continually treat them with, depending on what your control, how good your control is, and whether or not you can eradicate the pest in an outdoor environment, it's impossible, basically. So you just treat it every year, and the pest becomes more and more and more resistant to what you had before, right? And then
crops are like people. They get sick too. They get attacked by bugs and fungus. They get attacked by insects. They get attacked by bacteria. And if you're in the production business and you have to basically stake your economic well-being on the production from your acreage, you're going to want to do everything you need to do to increase your yield. And so, yeah, they're called crop protection chemicals. And really, if you go back to the beginning of last century, the Haber process is responsible for the population that exists today on the planet. If we could not fix nitrogen through the Haber process, which is a high-pressure process that adds ammonia to hydrocarbon precursors, we would not be able to have yes, that's right, the good German chemists who basically came up with how you fucking fix nitrogen, which bacteria figured out how to do with enzymes, but German chemists figured out how to do it with pressure and heat. That's the reason why the planet is as populated as it is today. But just the word about crop protection chemicals, we take it for granted when we go to the grocery store and we have a plethora of different food, especially here in the West. You go to a Safeway that's open 24/7 and it's got 10 different flavors of, whatever. I mean, that's what the American public and what people consume and what people demand, is having fast food and food that's cheap and affordable that they can basically sustain their family's population on. And crop protection chemicals, like it or not, if you don't like Roundup, fuck it, it is used to produce all the food that we eat on this planet. That's just a given. Nothing you can do about it. Even organic farming, so-called organic farming, you know what's used for crop protection in organic farming are things that, first of all, don't have all of the hallmarks of a crop protection chemical today. And so a lot of chemicals kill bugs. What makes a crop protection chemical today is one that does so, that's safe and effective by the time that produce or that food gets into the marketplace or gets to the food processing plant, that the degradation products of that thing, either by the sun or light, or the other important aspect that differentiates cannabis, is most produce is washed. And when produce is washed, a lot of the treatment that's used to control pests and bugs on the fruit is washed away. Cannabis is not washed, of course, until it's extracted. So anything that's extracted is going to take what's ever on that plant. So if there's pesticides on the plant, it's going to be in the extract, no question about it. So we shouldn't be surprised that you do see pesticides residues in the extracts, and some of these residues, again, these are crop protection chemicals that are sold by multinational large companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer and DuPont, and those are regulated for use for agrochemicals for food, where food is going to be treated and then food is going to be washed off. It's not regulated for use on a product that's meant to be smoked. So these are not registered for use on products where thermal degradation of these things have been thoroughly investigated, and the companies have registered for those end uses. So because those are all unknowns, no one knows what happens when we heat up these pesticides. I can tell you that ultimately they degrade. They don't vaporize like they won't, like cannabinoids. When you heat them up, they cleanly vaporize and they transfer into the mucosa. These things are not meant to be thermally vaporized. I think there's a lot of degradation chemistry, and Eagle 20 in particular, on heating will generate hydrogen cyanide. So it generates cyanide on heating. It says so in the MS test.
So Mark, do you think then that some of these chemical companies are actually going to start playing with cannabis because these are inherent problems? These are issues that, you know,
I'm hearing more and more that there's
farming. There are no songs about farming. There's only laments because farming, you know, you can lose a crop, et cetera, et cetera. So there's got to be a way for, because again, this is still a burgeoning industry. There's got to
so if you take a company like Scott's,
start playing and putting out products that we can actually test clean and actually get out to people.
If you take a company like Scott's is actually just an end-use formulator. Like, they formulate other people's existing active ingredients that are registered for, like, grub control or like weed control or anything that a farmer or you would use in like a professional setting, like at hotels and resorts, you know, where they want the flower beds to look really nice and they don't want extraneous weeds. I mean, there are large markets for ag chemicals that don't include food. They're so-called, you know, the non-ag markets. But anyway, a lot of these compounds are some of the nasty things that you don't want on food, but they are still extremely effective at controlling things like powdery mildew and other fungus. But you certainly don't want it in and around cannabis. And you guys tell me, I mean, isn't there integrated pest management strategies such that you should not need to use these ag chemicals?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the big problem, Mark, is, you know, everybody, okay, the reason that they came up with these chemicals is because it's so difficult to control these pests over the long term when you have consistent, on time, all the time production of tissue of cannabis, right? Without tissue culture and doing it like poinsettias or orchids or something like that. And even then, it's like you buy an orchid from the store, they always have scale on them. They've always got something on them. It's never clean. And those were from tissue culture. And it's because it's extremely difficult to manage pests in tight, high-density agricultural applications and industrialized agriculture. And the thing is like you said, 100 years ago, this all started because all the farms were very small at that point in time, and people everybody grew their shit from seed, and it was all independent, and that was kind of how the weed market was people didn't. It wasn't. There was no such thing as I never even heard of powdery mildew or spider mites or anything until I got a clone from somebody. Or actually, my buddy brought some clones from 3rd floor in Oakland and asked me to hold on to them for 2 weeks in my bathroom, right? In like 2003. I had terrible environment on my very first grow because it was my very first grow. And there was no powdery mildew. It didn't happen. It wasn't until you introduce the pest, and once it's there under intense agriculture, it's super hard to manage these things, especially in a warehouse or especially greenhouses.
Especially if you're indoors, and especially if air handling system isn't what it normally should be. If the building wasn't designed to appropriately distribute the air, because a lot has to do with exposure to the fungal spores, and given the right opportunity, if the spores are in a nice, warm, moist environment, they're going to thrive. You can't keep it from happening. It's like, shoveling shit against the tide. The spores are everywhere. You can't keep them from really coming in contact. So really you have to do whatever you need to do in your IPM to manage the ability for the other part of your IPM to deal with fungal invasion like that, which I know can be absolutely devastating.
Well, I think one of the inherent problems, though, is cannabis is a plant that's meant to go to seed every year in nature, right? Most plants that go to seed every year, the reason they do that is because they grow fast, and they're also particularly susceptible to pests, right? And that was their natural solution. Hey, I'll just go to seed every year over winter, and then I'll come back up, right? So we're trying to grow this thing from clones, successive generations, these plants way beyond their hormonal and natural state of growth that they would be. These plants are susceptible to pathogens, and it's just a matter of time before things like mainly fungal pathogens like Pythium, Phytophthora, crazy stuff like that. That's gonna, you can manage it now, but eventually, agrochems or going back to seed or tissue culture or some type of, you got to really clean your shit, and you got to be really, really on top of it. And even then, I mean, it's if you get an infection, how do you fix that without shutting down and ruining your business plan, right? So
you got to, and I think it's mostly a lot of prevention. It's like you got to focus on the prevention. So the newest grow rooms, ones that I've seen indoor, 7 ml hospital glaze floors, hypoallergenic walls, 3M UV filtration, atmospheric manipulation, making the air feel like you're 5,000 feet high, different technologies, They
spend a lot of money on doing that for orchids and everything else, and they still don't not have scale on the It's still the same problem. It's industrialized agriculture breeds heavy-duty pests. That's just how it works. And if we continue to go from clone over and over and over for successive generations in a production setting, I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying for a lot of scenarios, like you're saying, if the facility's not designed correctly and all these other factors, or if you just have infected tissue, or you have one person that grows at their house and brings the shit in on them that works at your facility. I mean, it can be as simple as that, It's like, do you have to screen every single person that works for your facility? Like, you can't grow any houseplants, any of this shit, or they have to. You have like a locker room and a shower for everybody that comes to work. I mean, you're talking major protocols that require more investment, which it's just a fact of the matter. And if these things were so easy to control with natural reasons, why do we even have agrochems in the first place?
It sounds like the price once the regulations for what cannabis is. I mean, everything works when it's got a skin and you can wash it, but there's very few things that we inhale like tobacco, and tobacco doesn't have a good history with human beings. It really
and it's a potent insecticide in and of itself that doesn't need any help from us.
So the most of those problems are totally indoor.
it's like to go. That's why it sounds like all this. Like, weed will be cheap. I'm like, that doesn't work. It sounds like one day people will just be talking about massive crop failure, like they do in industrial agriculture. But with weed, as soon as you spray it, it becomes an instant poison. Where tomatoes you can spray and wash off. It's like a different half-life. You can't get away with all those industrial techniques with weed.
Well, you know, most of the insecticides now are systemic, or the fungicides as well, systemic fungicides, so you can't wash them off. They grow in the cells of the plant, and they carry on for a long time. And you don't see a lot of powdery mildew problems in outdoor grows, and healthy outdoor grows. You don't see a lot of mites. It's an indoor phenomenon. There's something called competitive exclusion. So that's when you try and set something up to be totally sterile, and then you put a food source in there. The very first organism that finds it owns it. It'll take over, like that PM. Whereas outdoors, there's a zillion other organisms already competing with it to do something on that plant, and maybe be eaten by it. You know?
The wine industry in California has been inundated with white powdery mildew. That's why they've had to go to Bacillus subtilis, which is a serenade, because they've been absolutely overrun with it to the point where it's destroying crops en masse.
Right. I don't agree with that either. I mean, I've seen tons of outdoor grows covered in stuff. Most of those were started not from seed, though, from cuttings that were most likely already infected with it.
Right. If they were transplanted out like that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
you could still get an outdoor grow, but you're proliferating
that clean.
You're proliferating stuff in an indoor grow that you would not necessarily see in an outdoor grow given the pressure. That comment is absolutely right on. The outdoor pressure that you experience and that the plant experiences growing in an outdoor environment completely different than an indoor space.
Well, I think it's also because we have.
I wasn't disagreeing with that.
I published a 10-page dossier on every known contaminant found in cannabis. The majority of them were found through Rob's research regarding industrial hemp, but that's because industrial hemp is being grown en masse on an industrial scale. We're going to find some of those problems cross over, and other problems creep up when we start growing industrial outdoor and indoor.
Right.
Because we haven't necessarily doing that, or we've had the science backing it up, researching it, and saying the one that we have, they can find the pesticides, because who before really Colorado and these other states became legal knew what their THC was, or that there was pesticides even accessible to cannabis. We've known it, but that's why we push that envelope. So there's definitely a need, as I said, because Mark, you never answered my question. We apparently don't have any companies out there who are actually testing cannabis with chemicals that are ingestible for humans.
Okay, so let me answer that question. So I would say that what you're going to see is similar to like what's gone on, say, in CO2 extraction or other things, is you'll get companies that are organically trying to grow from the bottom up by taking currently registered ingredients that they feel are safe and basically putting together the regulatory package that they would have to amend the current registration for that pesticide active ingredient. So, for example, if they were going to take like a currently used pesticide that they feel that is used in somewhat of a systemic way, and I want to go back to something that I think it's Breeder Steve said. Absolutely right. There is a current trend in the industry towards the use of not only systemic treatments for the protection of agrochemical or agricultural plants against bugs and fungus. It's being put into a seed coating that's actually in the seed itself, and as the seed germinates in the soil, actually it's treating the soil in and around where the seed originally starts to take hold, and so think of it like a plume of chemical that the plant takes up and is now exactly what Steve said, systemically distributed throughout the plant, such that when the insect tries to land on the plant later on in the plant's life, it doesn't find it palatable or whatever, because it knows that it's got this juice in it that's going to kill it. So there is sort of a trend towards that, and I don't know about the impact of that in cannabis and how that affects the quality of cannabis, if there's systemic delivery of these pesticides throughout. I mean, again, this has been studied in food, and typically, Steve, what they see is that when you deliver something systemically throughout the lifetime of the plant, you could usually get away with a lot lower concentration than you would use in a foliar spray to control the same organisms. So it's viewed, first of all, from the farmer's perspective. I'm applying less chemicals and getting a good yield. That's a good thing. But again, that's for food crops like corn and soybean, where it's not necessarily going to be smoked. So I just don't know what the impact of the systemic delivery of those active ingredients throughout cannabis, which is then consumed by humans by smoking it. I can't really say what the I would say in general, it's probably so effective at such a low concentration that it probably wouldn't have that great of an impact. And the way that answers your question, Etienne, is it lowers the risk for someone to say to the EPA that there is no impact on human health, and the EPA would have to look at that, look at the studies. You would have to do generational studies in animals to show that it has no impact on the animal's health, and with that data in hand, you could amend the registration. That active ingredient can now be registered and used in a cannabis market. So again, this is 5, maybe 10 years out by somebody with a big pile of money who can do it.
So due to the systematic buildup that happens due to these chemicals or biochemicals that go into the plant, do they also work its way into the rosin itself and into the trichomes?
If it's systemic, the notion is that it's distributed all throughout the plant in some way, shape, or form, sometimes in a metabolized form. So the actual active ingredient is what's called a prodrug, and the prodrug enables its systemic delivery throughout the plant's lifetime, such that it's sort of part of the chemical makeup of the plant, if you will. Now again, you're using a lot less than if you were to spray the plant with the material, but the question is now the material's inside the plant. It's, but at probably a much lower level than it would be if it were effective outside the plant, so probably safer. But I don't know. I mean, someone has to do the studies and make sure that it has no impact on human health, and make sure it's done by a good university that looks at a double-blind study so they can really make an accurate scientific assessment. Does that answer the question?
Well, we still don't know of any chemical companies currently that are actually doing so because of the trials it has to. But
I bet they're looking into it, but they're notoriously
somebody from Scott's or somebody saying, "Hey, we should actually start playing."
Okay, so here's another thing. Here's another thing. I want to go back to hemp. You got to remember that the economic. We talked about this, right, Todd, last week or 2 weeks ago, I think. The economic driver for hemp, and we were talking about hemp, is going to be the seed, and the seed oil and the protein that you get is going to be the driver that's going to create a byproduct in the fiber and the pulp that will be competitive with wood and sawdust someday. But right now we consume a lot of wood and a lot of trees, so sawdust is available and abundant, and when you go to wipe your ass, it was a tree at one point, okay? Now they're turning hemp into rolling papers. And I want to do a shout out to my boys here, Lucas and Ben from Restock. If you're a grower somewhere on the West Coast, either in Washington, Oregon, I'm in lovely state of Oregon right now, but if you're in California, Oregon, NorCal, or Oregon, and you have stalk and you want to repurpose that stalk and convert it into rolling papers, hit me up, because we got a guy who's going around with a chipper, and he will chip all your stalks, convert it into pulp. We send it off to a place, and they will come back with cases of these rolling papers for you for your stalks. So you're repurposing your stalks from your grow and turning it into rolling papers that you need to roll up big fatties for you and your friends of organically grown hemp made from your fucking grow. So hit me up if you're interested. But let me just go back to the driver. Remember, for hemp is going to be seed and seed oil, and that's going to create all of this fiber that's now going to become available. And when it's grown for seed and seed oil, you got to remember that you're up against the soybean and the corn, and well, mostly soybean. Let's talk about who benefits from soybeans today. Monsanto, Cargill, DuPont, all the big chemical companies all sell the chemicals that are used, and the seeds. DuPont has a seed company, and there's other companies that have seed companies. These companies are all integrated in their pesticide management. There's Roundup Ready seeds that are all ready to be grown with a chemical barrage that are provided by. So when you're talking about using hemp to displace things like soybeans, you're up against a huge piece of American agricultural industry which has a vested interest to keep things just the way they are, which is on a high protein, high beef diet that requires farmers to maximize protein yield per acre. Now, again, we debated this issue a couple weeks ago on Hash Church. The numbers that I've seen on the internet are as high as 8,000 pounds per acre versus soybean, which is 365. 8,000 pounds just sounds really too high. But even if he's off by an order of magnitude, let's say 800 pounds, if you could get 800 pounds an acre of hemp seed protein versus 365 a soybean, no fucking question about it. Hemp is going to take over the world as being the economic source of protein. That's the cheapest form of a farmer being able to convert an acre of land to protein. Period, end of story. The high value of the oil that you get, the oil is the highest value, and the byproduct is the protein. And then the other byproduct is the fiber and the herd, which you can use for all kinds of shit. So when that takes off, there will be companies, Etienne, that will get on this bandwagon of saying our stuff will be registered for use in these products, because you're going to have to basically displace soybeans in the world as being the way that the farmer produces protein in this next century.
So no, we don't have anybody. You never answered my question. Great tangent, but never answered my question.
The only thing I will say on that is that when you plant hemp for seed, the fiber is not of an ideal fiber. It doesn't. Planting for fiber and planting for seed are very, very different things. Fiber is very, very close together in a high percentage of seed per square foot, and seed is much more spaced out, and it grows differently. So can definitely get
on top of that. It depends on if you cottonize it, if you don't cottonize it, what type of machinery you're using. Are you using like the Gardella machinery that produces a nice fine, so I can produce a fine fiber, or something that's going to be like what we had.
But even if you use that finest machine, if you're using stalks that were from seeded plants, you are not going to have planted that. That's not the fiber.
Agreed. Agreed.
That's all I'm saying there.
Etienne, I guess the one way I could throw something at answering your question about like what are the solutions to any kind of larger scale, what would I say? Something that would work for cannabis versus a tomato. It wouldn't be on the end of chasing a pesticide company developing a chemical to spray that's safe. There's no chemical that's ever going to be safe to spray in my fucking lungs, other than terps. But when it comes to techniques and technologies to be applied to things like PM, there are ways to go at it. They're probably just more human intensive, and I don't have a problem with there being 30 people marching through an acre. It seems like it's more inclusive than a giant truck just bulldozing through it and calling that farming. So I think cannabis in any kind of industrial way is going to demand the inclusion of mankind. Because like when I look at techniques that what can I use on this plant to not go down like everybody else in my region who eventually, to stay competitive, is using dangerouser and dangerouser stuff every year. I look at UV light, and then I started researching. I'm like, okay, it works, it doesn't work, it's here or there. Then I saw in combination with peroxide, which is another compound that works here or there, it makes the peroxide 10 times stronger. And now I'm like, okay, well now we have something more non-invasive with a low shelf life that could be used, because the real question is what can be used in flour. Lots of things work in veg, but what can be used in flour? And UVC light in combination with clean hydrogen peroxide seem to be the only things I know of, because I know peroxide is used to remove PM in, dirty dunk techniques at the end. So, I mean, Mark's waiting to chime in, but like that's what I'm researching personally. The combination of the two being stronger than the two parts separate is my way, I guess, I'm pushing forward.
Are you doing any lab testing with that?
This is more like wreck a plant, bring a plant back, look at its, look at that same systemic behavior. When does it come back because it's built in? You know, it's solving it for a time, and then knowing this is my rod and my staff and my quiver for this issue for life is what I'm going after. So I have plants that are outside that are of a different, like comfrey plant, it has PM, and I use it on there to see is it even the same type of PM, what's the reaction rate compared to indoors, because I want it to work, whether it's a greenhouse, whether it's indoors or whether it's outdoors, it's just a matter of scale. So that's my proposition, is I'm following industries that are doing university research on, well, we apply peroxide and it kills the eggs, but it doesn't kill the adults. We use UVC light, it kills the adult, it doesn't kill the eggs. We apply both within 10 minutes and it kills both 3 times stronger. I just hate that it's an obscure document. That's not something that's really put into practice, and I shouldn't be the guy reading the back of the internet, but that seems to be where it is in hand-to-hand combat with large-scale things, which is the way I think it naturally should go.
Well, my original,
I mean, peroxide's a great anesthetic. You know, it kills bacteria. It just stops them dead. It basically assaults them with hydroxyl radical, which they can't overcome. That's the little fizzing that you see. I'm not sure. So, what do you use peroxide in your water treatment or your canopy? Is that what you're doing?
In the case of let's say what I'm doing, I have the stomata open. I shut off the lights. I'm moving from, let's say, misting to cold fogging, which is like a 5-micron mist. So it'd be like 3% hydrogen peroxide mist that's saturating the environment, and then I come through with my UV light to essentially explode all the peroxide on the surface of the plant in contact with the mildew or eggs or active insects. So I'm trying to get more out of my peroxide than a 10-second burn that has a low effect. It's not as effective because I pushed the peroxide up to 20%, and then you start seeing plant damage. It's more effective, but you get plant damage, and that's where Bozo is going to.
It'll start to go after some of the pigments. I mean, for those chem nerds in the audience, so hydrogen peroxide is HOOH, right? It's like water, but it's like an extra oxygen molecule inserted. And when Horatio shines the UV light on that, you basically do a scission of that bond and make hydroxyl radical, which will obliterate any biological tissue it comes in contact with. So yeah, I'm not surprised that compromises the plant or the trichomes, or that's going to rip apart anything.
Well, basically, I just had to back off.
It's going to be
had to back off. As long as I backed off, like I was like 20%, 30 seconds of light, and yeah, I exploded the plant. And I'm like, okay, well, what about 3 seconds and 3%, and 3 times a week instead of just 1 man dose? And so it's all about learning that, okay, this is going to require another employee, and that's fine. And he comes 3 times a day at low dose. My man dose and walk away and do hash church is not appropriate, large scale. So that's the thing I work out, is when can I back off the kill?
Yeah, I mean, you got me thinking about, the peroxide treatment that's commonly used in toothpaste, and actually that's used in things like OxyClean. OxyClean, I think, is just percarbonate, which is just, again, it's an added oxygen that's, rather than just carbonate, which is CO3 minus, it has an extra oxygen in there, and so it tends to, again, be these things that sort of indiscriminately, attack anything biological, I think it would be cool to actually understand exactly what that does to PM. I don't know that literature, but I can look at it over the next week and maybe report back next week and see what I find. It's cool. It's a cool idea, actually. It's a cool idea, actually. Really neat.
For the deep water culture or aeroponics or hydroponics, I used to use a tablespoon for every 5 gallons of water of hydrogen peroxide. Helped as a pH balancer, so I never used a pH up or down. I just mixed my nutrients, and I used hydrogen peroxide. I never had a root problem, fungus. It was unbelievable. I mean, I always used it in deep.
Peroxide won't change the pH, right? It's not acidic or base.
Right.
All right, well then, since we went originally, here's an idea, I'm having a thought here. We went originally and found laboratories and found the experts and brought testing and started testing. So why don't we reach out? I mean, Baer's in the city of Berkeley. They've got a huge research thing, and they also do fungicides, et cetera, et cetera. What about we just
and the good thing about Baer's the
why don't you
largest
looking at
chemical company in the world.
Start looking
Baer's
at
the largest chemical company in the world, I think. Somebody checked that, but I think that's right. I think if you exclude the petroleum companies, Baer is the largest chemical company, largest like Monsanto type of company that provides,
So if I were going to approach him, say, call him on Monday, what would you say would be the first thing I should talk to them about?
I think the great thing to do is to show them the letter that the EPA sent back to the Attorney General of Colorado, giving them guidance on what the companies need to do.
I'm talking past there. When I talk to them and say who I am and where I'm with, we're past that conversation. So it's
is your company willing to register crop protection chemicals for weed? That's a good question.
That's what I was looking for, right there. You know, what
the PhD on Hash Church wants to know.
I do. Inquiring minds want to know. On top of how many thousands of growers and people that into this.
Tell them I'm a PhD. Just say some fucking idiot from Pennsylvania, you know. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. You know, those companies are all extremely conservative, and again, they're all at the soybean trough, right? So they're fat and happy, making a whole lot of money, playing it conservative. They're publicly invested, you know. And they have multi-million-dollar deals. They got
agricultural crop that is untouched and untested.
Really good customer boxes at all of the major stadiums. So when you start wheeling and dealing with any of these big companies, make sure you ask them about their custom boxes that they have at the basketball and hockey arena of your choice, because they got them all. I mean, it's just business at a whole different level, dude. I just got out of that shit, right? And I still get shit in the chat room. Oh, you used to be at DuPont, whatever. Well, I ain't there anymore. Now I'm growing weed and making hash for a living, people. And, hey, Etienne, you know what it comes down to? When this thing drops at a federal level and it's no longer listed like Bernie Sanders wants it to do, every Hash Church member should vote for Bernie Sanders, because the guy wants to take cannabis off the fucking list. Off the fucking list, okay? Hillary's talking about Schedule 2. Fuck Schedule 2. That means Monsanto and DuPont are going to own cannabis. We want off the list. That means vote for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is going to take cannabis off the fucking list and free all the incarcerated people that Todd can relate to. And dude, it's vote for Bernie Sanders. End of story. Sorry.
All right, just one last note, because the hydrogen peroxide does seem a little bit scorched earth policy, and a lot of people are like, what about the bennies? Come on, give us something other than the hospital treatment to life. And I'm like, okay, well, I have another side of the coin. I'm working with photosynthetic bacteria and foliarly applying those. I use them in my root zone to control Pythium because I am inevitably attracted to organics. So on the foliar side, I am using photosynthetic bacteria on a separate set of humidity dome clones, because I like UVC and I like peroxide, but I really love working with life. So having a solution that kills is one thing, but having a solution that is so much more complicated than all that is also way more attractive. So I guess right now I'm definitely working with photosynthetic purple bacteria. I use them in my deep water culture, along with a whole plethora of other type of all aerobic bacteria to basically dominate and control the field. The key is I have to provide them a lot of oxygen on their own, separate from the plant. But it's another technique to go at it so that it's not just white roots and salt chemicals for all those people losing heart.
Yeah, so if that's effective, let me give everybody a hint. You know that stuff called 10-multein borax? You ever see that stuff? It's like an old brand of borax soap. Is anyone listening?
I know.
Yes.
I know what you're talking
Borax.
about. Borax.
Yeah.
Is it the one with the girl on the front?
The mule.
No, it basically has the same action as carbonate, or as percarbonate, or as peroxide when it's dissolved. So it'll do the same thing, but it's a powder, and you can easily get it out. You know, so whatever. It's just it'll do the same action, perborate. Anyway, for what it's worth. They use
Skunkman
it.
Sam had a funny comment. He said, Bernie does not have a chance. My wife said she will vote for him, and she has voted for a loser every year. Ralph Nader and the likes. That's funny.
Well, we can hope, can we? I mean, what are we supposed to do? Vote for an idiot? Vote for one of these other people? I mean, come on, man. Hillary Clinton, give me a break, you know?
No, he never said don't vote for Bernie. He never said that. He merely said Bernie does not have a chance. My wife said vote for him. There's a recurring pattern in her voting pattern.
You know, we're talking about the pesticides. One solution is to do what the plant did every year. Take all your favorite plants, make your own seeds with them, right? Kill your moms, or, you know, make a bunch of seeds, whatever it is that you need to make, feminize, make all that stuff. Get rid of your infected tissue, clean your shit out, and grow from seed. And that's how the plant did it. That's one solution, you know.
Well, that's it right. That's it right there from the beginning when you were talking earlier about tissue, and ultimately tissue culture, certified tissue culture, will be the way you can do that on a large scale, with all the other protocols in place.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that makes cannabis good for tissue culture is because if you're growing in a production setting, it's only going to be alive 3 or 4 months. Whereas like with orchids, they have to be in greenhouses for years before they come to maturity, right? So that length of period that you have holdover plants and stuff makes the transfer of pests much more prevalent. Whereas if the plant's every 3 months and it's banging out and you clean it and it's new cultured stuff, that's totally possible. I'm not saying it's impossible to do this by any means. I'm just saying using the stuff that's currently off the shelf for turf and lawns and tomatoes and stuff isn't going to be the right solution, especially with states like Massachusetts even enacting all organic agriculture for this, you know. So
yeah, so let's bring this full circle, because I started smoking right away when the show started. I mean, I've been smoking nonstop since 9 a.m. puffing hard, and I might have been a little off earlier, but I want to ask Breeder Steve his thoughts about our adventures with resin head size from indoor to outdoor, sun-grown versus indoor. If he's still there before he's gone.
I'm still here. I don't recall, because it's been a long time since I've been making it, and I don't recall size differences between the same plants inside or outside.
What about quality and profile?
Well, I mean, you can have fantastic ones either way, right? But as far as just the being with the earth in the plant, I love that. I love it growing in the sunshine. It's a beautiful thing. It's a plant that was supposed to be outside. You know, I'm happy to grow it inside. I've loved lots of indoor plants I've grown, and I'm not opposed to it in any way, shape, or form. I just mean, given the option, I don't think I would be, like, even if I like growing my own tomatoes in my backyard, I probably wouldn't grow them in a closet in my house under a light. And it's the same way. I'd rather, if I could just fill up my backyard with them, I'd be quite happy.
Nice.
Well, I guess if we compare tomatoes, Todd, you might be right, because they do aeroponics farm for tomatoes at Epcot is amazing, and their tomatoes are huge in comparison to the tomatoes I've seen grown in Kansas and the Midwest.
Right. But Tony, isn't that a lot of strain specific? First off, and then second off, when you say what you said, what hits me is that it's like saying that indoors you're unable at producing a resin clan to its full potential under lights, which I think is an incorrect statement. A strain is going to do what it can do indoors as well as it's going to do what it does outdoors. In my experience, I've seen it do it better indoors, which is why indoor is always worth more. When you look at it, it has a better aesthetic, terpene profile, cannabinoid profile. It's usually finished better, more care. I mean, you know,
it can be awesome.
I love outdoors
no question.
too,
It can be awesome indoors.
But I don't believe that outdoors you get a bigger resin head than you would indoors of the same strain finished at the same time with a microscope or what have you. That's, I guess, that's where I disagreed with you.
How can we get someone else to ask her that same question? Somebody that's done both. Because
the main difference between it, basically what you're saying, Tony, is that there is something inherent in the wavelength of the sun that causes either hormonally or growth-wise a different reaction in the plant, right? That's essentially what, that there's actually a genetic predisposition in the plant to produce something with the wavelengths of the sun that are not produced with artificial light. And I don't know if we have enough information to be able to necessarily make that statement.
Here's what Skunkman Sam is saying.
But Sam would know a hell of a lot more about it than I did.
He just said bigger plant, bigger resin. The same clone, real tiny plants, the resin heads are smaller. I think under sun in a greenhouse is bigger heads.
Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I mean, what about the fact, everyone's like indoor, and I'm like, indoor's not a setting. Indoor can be any cockfuck between CFLs to Gavitas. Like,
for the record, not to cut you off for your show, Sam just said he agreed with Todd. I'm
just asking, we've seen metal halide versus HPS, and we've gone, yeah, the HPS gets me more wood, and wood in the bag gets me more money. But we never said, well, what did the metal halide trichome heads, just using a basic example of two different spectrums, how did it hit the plant? It's a very easy test most people have done without trying to go to the length of emulating the sun, which is all lights combined. You've seen differences in spectrum indoors affect the resin heads. That's why people have wacky lights. That's why CFL doesn't yield any plant material, but it can still yield trichomes. So, regionally, the Jamaican sun is different than the fucking Alaskan sun, and that would produce two different outdoor products. So the argument of outdoor is hard because it's a regional thing.
That's where you are. That's right.
Exactly.
Okay, Sam is saying no. I said bigger under sun in a greenhouse. He wanted to reiterate that, and then someone else had said something that I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to ask on a side note, Steve, your last Instagram picture, that giant calyx. What the hell is up with that, dude?
I was just having some fun thing in a artificial flower basket somewhere, and I was looking at it, and I was like, that, I have to take a picture of that. And just put it, it's totally plastic. It was just hilarious, though. I was like, I'm going to put this up and just start a thing.
That is really funny.
Fun and games, man.
Hey, what about, we're talking about all these different ways of growing, and aeroponics has been mentioned a couple of times. Let's talk a little bit about your guppy ponics that you did back in the day.
Yeah, good. I think for indoor growers and greenhouse, you could have them on your balcony too. But the aquaponics is really a beautiful way to grow, and for me, it's the cleanest way inside. I still love a great soil mix, and I still love a plant straight from good soil. But if I'm going to grow them inside, I would do it aquaponically, because I get the same growth I did out of hydroponics, and the taste is so clean. It's so specific to the variety that you're tasting.
Did your fish have any issues?
I fed them cheeseburgers sometimes. I had so many types of fish. I had shrimp, eels, there was, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many types of fish I had in there and aquatic plants. And it had a 400 halide over a 90-gallon aquarium growing these aquatic plants like crazy. And I would take cuttings off of them, stick them in Oasis trays, and sell them back to the fish stores, you know. The reservoir was producing something before the garden was even done. It was hilarious. But
the reason I asked that, Gross, is that there was years ago, Grower's Edge had an article about, you know, as they usually do, about aquaponics, and one of the farmers who was using tilapia, he said everything was fine until the tilapia had their own systemic problem that basically infected the whole crop of tilapia, which in turn affected the crop itself.
It's the monoculture issue again there. You know, if you've got a really diverse ecosystem in it, it can work really well. And the key is you've got to have somewhere where the water dries out on a lot of surface area, some type of rocks or whatnot, and it can flood and drain through that as it cycles back. And that's where the good aerobic bacteria take hold. And having the diversity we weren't raising one type of fish. We had at least 100 types of fish in there. It was ridiculous. You're not supposed to have more than an inch a gallon of fish in aquariums, and we'd got up to 5 inches a gallon. But we fed them so much that they didn't have to eat each other. And I was getting live fish to feed them most of the time, but sometimes for shock value, I would throw a cheeseburger in there, and the Oscars and piranhas, everything, rip it apart. In 60 seconds, you wouldn't see a trace of it. It was just mind-boggling. It was more fun watching the reservoir than the room. You know, that's never the case. But if you spend all your time staring at their healthy reservoir, what's that, cichlids? Yeah.
You had a bunch of cichlids in there, etc. So that's
right. Yeah, there were cichlids. Lots of cichlids, Central American and African ones, Malawi ones. But it was really just a beautiful, beautiful sweetwater setup. And the water returned through pipes that had a lot of holes drilled that were across the top around the outside. So it just sprayed in like a hard, hard rain. And that pulls much more oxygen into the water than just having a little bubbler at the bottom, right? So the tank would drain a quarter out to the room, and then if it ever went lower than that, there was a float valve to add water. So the reservoir ran 3 years without being changed on the same garden. And the only reason it changed then is we moved, you know. But the reservoir was just topped up whenever it got below a certain level. And it was so automated and easy. You know, you weren't lugging any soil around or amendments. You're just planting right into rocks and pulling out mesh baskets. The mesh baskets would always have nylon wicks that ran down. So there was redundancies built in. It was just a really easy way to grow. It was, yeah, I like it for, not only was it easier labor-wise, but the ashes of the smoke were white, not crusty, blackish gray or even light gray. They were really white ashes. And it was the first and last toke of a joint would taste the same. It didn't get all built up and tarry halfway through. It was really just the cleanest smoke. That's the only reason I would keep doing it, is I just loved the texture of the smoke was so fine and light.
Yeah, it seemed like the most perfectly cured herb. Like the sweet skunk that you did that time on there was just like, oh my God, velvety smooth.
Yeah, you couldn't get a more satisfactory smoke out of it any other way, you know.
Plus, you're right. It was kind of fun to just check out the reservoir, to see what the fish were doing. And were there not also like a layer of worms or something? Wasn't there some cycle where the fish shit and then the worms ate their shit and then the worm shit fed the plants or something? Or am I making that all up in my head?
Well, there wasn't worms.
What was there? Just fish.
Just the fish and eels, crabs, shrimp.
Lots of bacteria and microbes.
Yeah. As long as it's really well aerated and hitting lots of surface area with rocks. I had the flowering section was set up aeroponic, aquaponic. So the flowering tables had deep 2.5 feet roots hanging down with the wicks. and there was misters in there, and then when the water drained out of that area, it went into the mother marshes, I called them, and those were just big Rubbermaids full of rocks with large mesh baskets on top, and the level in those would go up and down because they would be up on blocks, and there would be a last one on the floor, so the water would drain through them, and then a sump switch would come on and return the water to the aquarium. But while it did that, it also fed drip lines back in the flower, so it was getting another little rock rinse back there, alternating with the mister. So the mister would come on for a bit to drain the aquarium into the flowering room. The return sent most of the water back to the aquarium, but it also ran drips in the flowering. So that water would just keep cycling, and it was just incredible. You could probably do the whole thing just with algae eaters and a light, because there's so much algae would grow on the walls. You'd have to have a lot of algae eaters, and they would just work it and work it and work it, and you
Did it smell at all?
could see them huffing this algae down, and the plants would stay green.
Did it create a big
Pardon me?
stink? Did it smell? Did it smell? Did it have like
No, no,
a?
it didn't smell at all. It smelled very nice, like.
So it didn't have like a swamp kind of smell, like swamp gas or anything like that?
No, no. If it wasn't moving, it would. But it was moving really a lot, right? So the water was very, very clean.
Right.
Very fresh. I never drank it, but you probably could, but I wouldn't. There was a lot of fish in there.
Right. Now the reason why I ask about smell is usually indicative if there's some type of process of respiration that the bacteria is basically digesting, and then either through what's called eutrophication. I mean, there's a lot of different processes by which they can actually emit gas that, again, can actually be beneficial for the plant's life, which was why I was asking about smell.
Yeah, it didn't have a strong smell. Like, it just had a clean smell.
So again, we were talking before about the challenge that the plant has outdoors versus indoors. I mean, this place, from the way you're describing it, is like it's got its own little sort of microbiome in there, and its own little bacteria and microbial population that, again, all the different organisms sort of fit into the puzzle and thrive. I find that fascinating. I really do.
It's really wicked to try. I recommend everybody that grows should at least try a mini setup with a plant and just try it for yourself, because it's really easier than you think. You just get the balance there, and you're not adjusting it a whole lot after that. It'll find a sort of equilibrium and just keep circulating. It's easy, and really just the cleanest tasting pot. I kept the reservoirs outside of the rooms, and often we installed them. I had a grow shop at the time that built aquaponic systems for people in Vancouver. So we would install the aquarium in your living room, and you'd have your basement lit up underneath. And water would come and go out of the aquarium a little bit all day, but nobody really noticed,
Totally cool. And you could listen to fish music while you're doing it, so you could...
Of course, yeah, you had to. Yeah.
You had to.
You can really double down, right, Mark?
Yep.
Whoa.
That's awesome, man. Super awesome. Good to hear the old stories.
I'm making some bacon-infused hard candy just because there's a few nuggets kind of sitting around on a pile of stems that were just going to be repurposed. So I figured, well, let's put them to purpose, right? So anyway, everyone's got bacon fat sitting in their kitchen somewhere. All you need to do is,
Not the English. They drip that shit on toast.
Yeah, man. Well, just decarb your wheat and your bacon fat, drop it into some molten sugar, and you'll have candy, hard candy.
Pan drippings. Drippings on toast, mate.
You could put the Canadian touch on it, Mark, by adding a little maple syrup, Hey?
I personally have not eaten bacon in a long, long time.
But bacon-infused candy is a completely different thing, dude.
I'm not eating meat. This is infused bacon. It's different. Chemist told me.
Oh, it's bacon fat, man. It's like totally, it's innocent. It's all good. Just a bunch of triglycerides. It's all good.
You gotta get that Indian candy
Bacon
again,
fat
Mark.
is like the epitome in sweat and grease and grime of what he doesn't eat.
It's
Like complete opposite.
cannabinoid.
like that's like telling like a vegetarian, it's like, hey man, you want to eat some bacon fat?
I got some meat juice for you, buddy.
I got some meat juice and some fat.
Ah, you know, I could do a little meat juice.
Might as well eat some bone marrow with it, you know? Get some bone marrow and some...
Like a pate bone.
I'm doing it for the science. It's a solvent, man. I need the solvent.
Don't worry, it's just a ground up anus, man. It's totally cool.
How come all your dabs taste like bacon?
Yeah,
Bacon flavored, bacon flavored.
Mark's over there like, yeah, I quit my day job at DuPont. I now live in Colorado. I grow weed and I make hash with bacon fat. Yeah, it tastes like bacon. Yeah,
Oregon,
it smells like bacon. Every dab's bacon.
Oregon, get it straight.
Tony, you should probably get on the bacon terps.
Yeah, sorry, Oregon. I'm going to try to extract bacon fat terps.
I tried, Tony. It gums up the whole equipment, and then to keep the equipment kosher, so Bubbleman doesn't taste meat in his terps, you have to clean it and then torch it and put it in a kiln. It's brutal. It's not worth.
What is this?
It smells like you're rendering people. It's not pleasant.
This is the anti-vegan terp. Meat terp.
Meat terps.
Meat terp.
When are you coming to town, Steve, to Vancouver? I want to show you these terpenes.
I'm due for a visit. Yeah, I haven't been down in a while, so.
We got some terpenes.
I was gonna try and get down before Christmas.
Yeah, you should do it, man.
If not, I'm coming in the new year for sure because I got Black Sabbath tickets.
Nice. That's awesome. I brought my son to Black Sabbath the last time they were here. We were in like the 5th row.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I first listened to Black Sabbath when I was like 11 years old, and like around 12 or 13, I was pretty deep in at that point. And so to take my son when he was 11 years old to Black Sabbath live, albeit they were older, still they put on a pretty rockin' show. And the dude they have playing drums, I don't know if it's the same for the tickets you have, Steve, but they had this young guy playing drums, and he was pretty incredible.
Who's the guitar player?
What's that?
Who's the guitar player now?
Well, it was Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler were both guitar and bass.
Nice. Tony.
Yeah, that's who I saw. It was Ozzy, Geezer, and Tony, and then just the drummer dude. I can't remember what his name was, but he got the boot from the tour I saw. And now this tour, the one Steve's talking about, is like for sure the last tour, you know, as they say, if you believe them. It'll be a good show to see nonetheless. I had a great time. I'll tell you, when Tony Iommi lays those riffs down, it's like, holy shit. Like it literally sounds like they're like 30 or 40 years ago and they're in a garage. Like it's just so fun. It's such a raw killer sound. One of the things that we love about Black Sabbath, you know, they don't, by no means would I say that they were overproduced.
Good times.
Did they have the coughing before Sweet Leaf? Did they do the coughing? No coughing?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Heard the coughing, man. Know the coughing well.
No, but did they do the coughing when they played the song live? I was wondering.
Of course. Everything, man. Everything sounded amazing right up until 2/3 of the way through the show, and then Ozzy just lost his voice, and he was like, sorry, we're done now. And I was like, man, I was happy to get 2/3 of a show, to be honest, because it could have just been a quarter of a show.
Yeah, it's more just the...
Does it say he stopped the show at 2/3 of the way?
It was still a long show, but yeah, like as his voice was cracking towards the end, the first songs, like 9 or 10 songs were killer. They literally, he was hitting the notes and they were sounding exactly, no matter, even without Ozzy's voice cracking, if his voice cracked, Geezer and Tony were so on point with this young drummer that it was just like the tightest Sabbath you've ever heard live. So trust me, even if you get 6 songs, those 6 songs will be so killer. And he just nailed, he puts them out one by one. I mean, keep in mind, dude, Ozzy was a fucking maniac. The fact that he's alive is incredible. You know what I mean? I don't think anyone can deny that.
I thought he died a decade ago, and then all of a sudden he was like on reality TV, and I'm like, that dude's still alive? No way! It's not possible. And it was like, yeah, there he is. And I was like, I can't even believe it. And like Hollywood resurrected and then preserved him for another 30 years.
Yeah, he's
So, guys, like,
It's incredible.
him and Keith.
Yeah, did you guys see the meme that was going around with Keith Richards that said, we're going to have to start thinking about what kind of world we're going to leave to Keith Richards?
That's right. I didn't see that. That's good.
It's a great meme. It went around quite good. It was my friend Paul DeFelice from the Holy Smokes in Nelson was the one that came up with that meme. And man, it was a funny one. It's true, right? It's like, yeah, Keith Richards is for sure just going to outlive everyone. I always said whatever deal the Stones made with the devil, that was definitely they made a better deal than most, let's just say. Out of all those people that made the deal with the devil, the Stones seem to have gotten the best contract.
I mean, they've been around for like 50 years.
I saw their 50th anniversary concert. It was insane.
So how old are they? Like 75?
Absolutely in their 70s.
Wow, so they're 70 years old. 75, something like that.
But more importantly, and I'll say this, I saw the Stones in Toronto they did a 50th anniversary tour. It wasn't a single concert. They did a ton of U.S. dates, but they always start their tours in Toronto. For whatever reason, back in the day, they had some serious connection to Toronto. The Rolling Stones have started many a tour in Toronto, and more importantly,
money. There's more money in Toronto. That's why.
They've done their no, they have a connection to Toronto. The Stones don't need money, bro. They're like worth hundreds of millions.
No, it's the money people in Toronto that bring the Stones there, trust me.
No, but they have a connection, I'm telling you. Google this and you'll find it, you'll see it. It's a thing. They have a connection with Toronto since like the 60s, and it's why they do. They go and when they're practicing for a tour, they go to Toronto and they'll like literally practice in Toronto for a couple weeks before the tour starts in Toronto. And then goes on. But the point was...
Because everywhere looks nice after that.
What's that?
Because everywhere else looks nice after that.
No doubt, dude. I'm telling you. But I was lucky enough to be at the last show.
That's their preseason, like sports.
Did you freeze Bubbleman? What happened?
No, I just stopped talking because every time I spoke, someone spoke over me, so I figured I would let whoever wanted to talk. And now it's all quiet. So it's only if I talk that you fucking guys will talk.
Yes.
I'm gonna jump so y'all have a great day is what I'm gonna say.
You too, Todd.
Hey, thanks for coming out, Todd. And it is 1 o'clock, so we did pull off a solid 4 hours. I want to thank Breeder Steve for coming out and sharing some stories with us. That was awesome, dude. Much appreciated. And Horatio and Mark Scialdone, Todd McCormick, Tony Verzura, Fletcher, who came in under archive, Skunkman Sam, who was in the chat, and Johnny B, and everyone. Thank you guys all for making Hash Church a great dialogue. It really went nonstop today. That was pretty fucking solid. Thank you guys. I'll actually rewatch this one. So we'll see you all next week. Hash Church 62.
Have a great day, guys.
Peace.